The gavel struck like thunder, and Evelyn Marlowe's world shattered. Across the courtroom behind the judge's bench sat the man who had destroyed her family, Bramwell Crane, draped in robes of justice he had no right to wear. Her hands trembled as she clutched the rail, watching him preside over another man's fate with the same cold indifference he'd shown when he vanished with her father's life savings 7 years ago. Now he would decide if rancher Dawson Hale kept his land or lost everything. And Evelyn stood trapped between silence and revenge, between her past and a future she never expected. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The stagecoach had rolled into Copper Ridge 3 days earlier, carrying Evelyn Marlowe and dreams she barely believed in anymore. She'd answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride, a desperate measure for a desperate woman. The East held nothing for her now but memories of shame and ruin. Her father had died broken-hearted. Her mother followed 6 months later. Evelyn had no siblings, no inheritance, nothing but the clothes on her back, and a single carpet bag containing everything she owned. The man who'd placed the advertisement, Dawson Hale, owned a cattle ranch 20 miles outside of town. His letter had been brief, honest, almost blunt. I need a wife. Someone strong enough for ranch life. Someone who won't run when things get hard. If that's you, come to Copper Ridge. We'll see if we suit. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't what she dreamed of as a girl. But it was honest, and honesty was a rare commodity in Evelyn's experience. She'd expected to meet him immediately upon arrival. Instead, she'd been greeted by his foreman, a weathered man named Colt who'd tipped his hat and explained that Dawson was dealing with legal troubles and would meet her in town the following morning. Legal troubles turned out to be an understatement. Now Evelyn sat in the Copper Ridge courthouse, her spine rigid against the hard wooden bench, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. The air smelled of dust, old paper, and nervous sweat. Railroad lawyers in expensive suits huddled at one table, whispering among themselves with the confidence of men who always won. At the other table sat Dawson Hale. She'd seen him for the first time that morning, and the sight of him had stolen her breath for entirely different reasons than fear. He was nothing like she'd imagined. His letters had been simple, straightforward, giving away little of the man himself. She'd pictured someone older, perhaps weathered and worn by ranch life. Dawson Hale was neither old nor worn. He was probably in his early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from years of hard physical labor. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. He wore simple ranch clothes, a worn shirt, vest, and trousers, but carried himself with quiet dignity. When their eyes had met across the courthouse steps, something had passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that their futures were about to collide in ways neither had anticipated. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through Evelyn's thoughts. The rustle of clothing filled the room as everyone stood. And then he entered. Judge Bramwell Crane. Evelyn's knees nearly buckled, her vision tunneled. The sounds of the courtroom faded to a distant roar as she stared at the man walking toward the bench. It was him. God help her. It was him. 7 years had changed him. His hair had gone gray at the temples. Lines creased his face that hadn't been there before. He'd put on weight, grown a mustache, but Evelyn would have known him anywhere. Those eyes, cold, calculating, devoid of warmth, were seared into her memory. Bramwell Crane had been her father's business partner. They'd owned a textile importing company together in Philadelphia. Evelyn had been 18, engaged to a young man from a good family, planning her wedding. Life had been comfortable, predictable, safe. Then Crane disappeared. And with him went every penny of company funds, every bit of capital, every investment. He'd forged her father's signature on documents, emptied bank accounts, sold off inventory, and vanished like smoke. Her father had been blamed initially. Investigators had questioned him relentlessly, suggesting he was complicit or incompetent. The scandal ruined him. His health failed under the weight of shame and stress. He died still trying to clear his name, still seeking justice that never came. The authorities eventually determined that Crane had acted alone, but by then the damage was done. Evelyn's engagement ended. Her fiancé's family wanted nothing to do with scandal. Her mother's health deteriorated. They lost the house, the servants, everything. They'd moved to a cramped boarding house where her mother coughed through the nights and faded day by day. And now Bramwell Crane sat on a judge's bench in a frontier town, wearing robes of justice, about to pass judgment on others. Evelyn's hands gripped the bench in front of her so tightly her knuckles turned white. Rage and disbelief warred within her chest. How? How had this man, this thief, this destroyer of lives, ended up here, cloaked in authority and respect? "You can sit now, miss." A gentle voice beside her made Evelyn realize she was still standing while everyone else had taken their seats. She looked down to find an older woman with kind eyes gesturing to the bench. "Sorry," Evelyn whispered, lowering herself shakily. Her eyes went to Dawson. He sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a nervous-looking man named Hargrove, who kept shuffling papers and wiping his brow. Dawson's expression was calm, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. This was the man she'd traveled across the country to marry, this stranger whose fate now rested in the hands of her family's destroyer. Judge Crane banged his gavel. "This court is now in session. Case number 47, Rocky Mountain Railroad Company versus Dawson Hale. Mr. Thornton, you may proceed." The lead railroad lawyer stood, smoothing his already immaculate suit. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a straightforward case of unlawful occupation. Mr. Hale currently resides on and operates a cattle ranch on land legally purchased by Rocky Mountain Railroad from his brother, Samuel Hale, 2 years ago. Despite repeated requests to vacate, Mr. Hale has refused to acknowledge the sale or leave the property." Dawson's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that sale was fraudulent. Samuel Hale's signature was forged. My client has documentation." "Mr. Hargrove," Crane's voice cut through the objection like a knife through butter. "You'll have your turn. Sit down." Evelyn watched Crane's face. Did she see a flicker of something when he looked at Dawson? Contempt? Predetermined judgment? Or was she projecting her own knowledge onto him? "Continue, Mr. Thornton." The railroad lawyer smiled. "We have a signed contract, dated and notarized. Samuel Hale, Mr. Dawson Hale's older brother, sold the property to our company for fair market value. The fact that the brothers may have had a personal dispute is unfortunate, but legally irrelevant. The sale is valid. The land belongs to Rocky Mountain Railroad. We're prepared to offer Mr. Hale a small settlement for relocation expenses, but he must vacate within 30 days. "My brother didn't sell that land." Dawson's voice rang out, deep and steady. "He couldn't have. He was in Denver at the time that document was supposedly signed." Crane's gavel cracked. "Mr. Hale, you will speak when spoken to or through your attorney. Another outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt." Evelyn saw Dawson's hands curl into fists on the table, but he nodded once. "Your Honor," Hargrove stood again, his voice less steady than Thornton's. "We have evidence that Samuel Hale was indeed in Denver on the date in question. We have hotel records, witness statements." "Circumstantial," Thornton interrupted smoothly. "Your Honor, travel records from 2 years ago prove nothing. Samuel Hale could have returned briefly to conduct this transaction. Our documentation is solid. The signature matches known examples of Mr. Samuel Hale's handwriting. The notary's seal is legitimate." Back and forth it went, lawyers arguing over papers and precedents while Evelyn's world continued to spin. She couldn't tear her eyes from Crane. Had he recognized her? She'd changed too, no longer the girl in fine dresses with carefully arranged hair. Her clothes now were simple, practical. Her face was thinner, older. She wore no jewelry, no adornment that might mark her as the daughter of wealth. Perhaps he didn't remember. Perhaps she'd been so insignificant in his grand scheme of theft that her face had faded from his memory. The thought made her anger burn hotter. "Mr. Hargrove," Crane said after nearly an hour of legal wrangling, "do you have any witnesses to support your claims?" "We do, Your Honor." "Miss Evelyn Marlowe." Hargrove turned toward her. "Miss Marlowe is an expert in handwriting analysis and documentation verification. She's examined the supposed sale document and can testify to its fraudulent nature." Every head in the courtroom turned toward Evelyn. She hadn't expected this. When Dawson's lawyer had visited her boarding room the previous evening, he'd explained the case and asked if she'd be willing to examine some documents given her background, Her father had taught her the textile business, which included learning to spot forged invoices and altered bills of lading. She'd agreed, wanting to help the man she'd come to marry. But she hadn't known she'd have to testify. Hadn't known she'd have to speak in front of Bramwell Crane. "Miss Marlowe?" Hargrove gestured toward the witness stand. Evelyn stood on shaking legs. The room seemed to tilt. She gripped the back of the bench in front of her for a moment, steadying herself. Then she walked down the aisle, feeling every eye on her, feeling especially the weight of Crane's stare. As she passed Dawson's table, he caught her eye. His expression was concerned but encouraging. He gave her the slightest nod as if to say, "You can do this." She climbed the steps to the witness box. The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand." Evelyn obeyed, her movements mechanical. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?" "I do." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "State your name for the record." "Evelyn Louise Marlowe." For the first time, she looked directly at Judge Crane, and in that moment, she saw recognition flash across his face. His expression didn't change. He was too practiced for that, but his eyes widened fractionally. His hand, resting on the bench, tensed. He knew her, and now he knew she knew him. The air between them crackled with unspoken history. Evelyn felt her fear transform into something else, something harder, colder. She would not let this man destroy another life. "Miss Marlowe," Hargrove began, approaching the witness stand, "can you please tell the court about your background in document analysis?" Evelyn tore her gaze from Crane's face and focused on the lawyer. "My father owned a textile importing business. Part of my education included learning to verify the authenticity of bills of sale, invoices, and shipping documents. Forgeries and alterations are common in that industry. I was trained to spot inconsistencies in handwriting, ink composition, paper aging, and seal impressions." "And you examined the document at the center of this case?" "I did." "What did you find?" Evelyn pulled her gaze back to the courtroom, avoiding Crane's stare. She focused on Dawson instead. He sat forward slightly, watching her intently. "The signature is forged," she said clearly. "The pressure patterns are wrong. When someone signs their own name, the pressure is consistent throughout. They know the movement of each letter intimately. This signature shows hesitation in certain strokes, particularly in the capital H and the final E. The forger was copying a signature they were looking at, not writing from muscle memory." "Objection." Thornton rose smoothly. "Your Honor, Miss Marlowe is not a certified handwriting expert. Her testimony is merely opinion based on limited experience." "Your Honor," Hargrove countered, "Miss Marlowe's expertise is directly relevant. She's identified fraudulent documents professionally for years." Crane was silent for a long moment. Evelyn could feel the weight of his internal debate. If he allowed her testimony, it could undermine the railroad's case. If he disallowed it, he showed bias, and she might find a way to expose him publicly. "I'll allow it," he finally said. "Continue, Mr. Hargrove, but keep it brief." Relief washed through Evelyn, followed immediately by renewed tension. She had to make this count. "Miss Marlowe, what else did you notice?" "The ink," Evelyn continued. "The body of the document was written with standard legal office ink, iron gall ink, which ages to a brown-black color, but the signature was added with a different ink. Under magnification, you can see it has a slightly different composition. It's newer, less oxidized." "So the signature was added later?" "Yes. The document is genuine in its text, but the signature was forged and added after the fact." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Dawson's expression remained controlled, but Evelyn saw hope flicker in his eyes. Thornton stood for cross-examination. "Miss Marlowe, how many times have you testified in court as an expert witness?" "This is my first time." "I see. And your training in handwriting analysis, how formal was this education?" "It was practical training from my father over several years." "But no formal certification, no degree, no official recognition of expertise?" Evelyn lifted her chin. "The forgeries I identified in my father's business cost criminals thousands of dollars. My accuracy speaks for itself." "Does it?" Thornton smiled coldly. "Or are you simply telling this court what Mr. Hale wants to hear? You're here as his intended bride, are you not?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush, but she held Thornton's gaze. "I arrived in Copper Ridge 3 days ago," she said evenly. "I examined the document 2 days ago. I'd never met Mr. Hale before yesterday morning. My analysis is based purely on the evidence, not personal interest. But you do have a personal interest in the outcome. If Mr. Hale loses his ranch, your marriage arrangement is likely void. If the document is genuine, then yes, Mr. Hale should lose his land. But it's not genuine. The signature is forged. That's not opinion. It's fact that can be verified by any qualified expert." "Your Honor," Thornton turned to Crane, "I move to strike Miss Marlowe's testimony as biased and unqualified." Crane's eyes met Evelyn's again. In that look, she saw calculation. He was weighing options, measuring risks. What would serve him best? What would protect his position? "Motion denied," Crane said slowly, "but I'm taking Miss Marlowe's testimony under advisement. It will be one factor among many in my decision. Mr. Thornton, do you have any other witnesses?" "Just one, Your Honor. We call Samuel Hale." Evelyn's head snapped toward the courtroom doors as they opened. A man walked in, tall, with the same build as Dawson, but lankier, with lighter hair and a weak chin. His clothes were expensive but ill-fitting, as if he'd borrowed someone else's suit. Dawson's entire body went rigid. "Sam," he breathed too quietly for anyone but Evelyn to hear. Samuel Hale took the stand. After being sworn in, Thornton began his questioning. "Mr. Hale, did you sign a contract selling your family's ranch to Rocky Mountain Railroad?" Samuel fidgeted, not meeting anyone's eyes. Yes. Yes, I did." The courtroom exploded. Hargrove jumped to his feet, shouting objections. Dawson half rose from his chair before his lawyer pulled him back down. The gavel cracked repeatedly. "Order! I will have order!" When the room finally quieted, Thornton continued with barely suppressed satisfaction. "Mr. Hale, why are you just now coming forward?" "I was afraid," Samuel said, his voice thin. "Afraid of my brother's reaction. Dawson always said that ranch was sacred, that our father built it with his own hands. But I had debts, gambling debts. The railroad offered good money, and I took it. You coward." Dawson's voice cut through the courtroom, low and deadly. "You lying coward!" "Mr. Hale!" Crane's gavel cracked. "One more word and you're removed from this courtroom." Evelyn watched the scene unfold with growing horror. Something was wrong. Samuel's testimony felt rehearsed, wooden. His eyes darted to Thornton repeatedly, as if seeking approval or confirmation, and the timing, appearing just as Evelyn's testimony threatened the railroad's case, was too convenient. "Mr. Samuel Hale," Hargrove began his cross-examination, his voice shaking slightly. "You claim you signed this document 2 years ago. Where were you living at the time?" "Denver." "And this document was notarized in Copper Ridge. Did you travel here specifically to sell the ranch?" Samuel hesitated. Yes. I came back for a few days. But we have hotel records showing you were in Denver on the dates in question. We have witnesses who saw you there." "They're mistaken." "All of them?" "I don't know. Maybe I got the dates wrong. It was 2 years ago." "Or maybe," Hargrove pressed, "you're lying right now. Maybe the railroad found you, paid off your debts, and convinced you to claim you signed a document you never actually signed." "Objection! Speculation!" Thornton was on his feet. "Sustained. Mr. Hargrove, limit yourself to questions." But the damage, or the help, was done. Doubt now clouded the case from both sides. Crane called a recess. As the courtroom emptied, Evelyn descended from the witness stand. Dawson was waiting at the bottom of the steps. Up close, he was even more imposing. But his eyes, when they met hers, were gentle, despite the fury she'd heard in his voice moments ago. "Miss Marlowe," he said quietly, "thank you for what you did up there. I only told the truth. I know, but it took courage." He glanced toward where Crane stood speaking with the bailiff. "That judge, he looks at you like he knows you." Evelyn's breath caught. "He does. From a long time ago." Dawson studied her face, reading the pain there. "Not a good memory, I'm guessing." "No, not good at all." "Will it affect his judgment? Your testimony, I mean?" "I don't know, Jan," Evelyn admitted. But Mr. Hale, Dawson, you need to know something. Your brother is lying. I know he's lying. Sam's always been weak, easily bought. No, I mean about signing the document. Evelyn lowered her voice. I examined that signature very carefully. It's definitely forged, but whoever forged it had access to genuine examples of your brother's handwriting. They copied it well enough to fool most people. If Samuel is now claiming he signed it, either he's being paid to say so, or what? Or he forged it himself and sold the land without the railroad even knowing, then kept quiet when they tried to take possession. Now they've found him and made a deal. Dawson's jaw clenched. Either way, he's working against me. Against us, Evelyn corrected softly. I came here to marry you, Mr. Hale. Whatever happens with that ranch affects us both now. Something shifted in Dawson's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. You've been here 3 days, and you're already taking my side against railroad lawyers and crooked family. Why? Evelyn thought about that question. Why was she fighting so hard for a man she barely knew? Part of it was simple justice. She could see the forgery, clear as day, and couldn't stand by while lies prevailed. Part of it was her own need to stand up to Crane, to not let him destroy another life the way he'd destroyed hers. But part of it, she realized, was the man standing before her. In their brief interactions, Dawson had shown her more honesty and respect than anyone in recent memory. He hadn't tried to charm her with false promises. He'd offered her a hard life with dignity, and now he stood fighting for what was his with quiet strength rather than bluster. Because it's right, she finally said. And because I'm tired of watching corrupt men win. Dawson held her gaze for a long moment. We might still lose. That judge has the power to rule however he wants, evidence or not. I know. And if we lose, I lose the ranch. I'll have nothing to offer you. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Evelyn surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. Together. Before Dawson could respond, Hargrove rushed over. They're calling us back in. The judge wants to make his ruling today. The afternoon session was brief. Both sides made closing arguments. Thornton painted Dawson as a bitter younger brother refusing to accept his sibling's legal right to sell. Hargrove argued that the evidence of forgery was clear and that Samuel's sudden appearance was suspicious. Through it all, Crane sat stone-faced on his bench. His eyes occasionally drifted to Evelyn, but his expression gave nothing away. Finally, he spoke. This court has heard testimony from both sides regarding the disputed sale of the Hale Ranch property. The evidence presented shows irregularities in the documentation, but also testimony from the apparent seller confirming the transaction. Evelyn's heart sank. He was going to rule for the railroad. Of course he was. Men like Crane always protected power and money. But then Crane continued, his voice taking on a strange tone. However, upon examination of all evidence, including the expert testimony regarding the forged signature and the questionable timing of Mr. Samuel Hale's appearance, this court finds insufficient proof that the sale was legitimate. Murmurs erupted. Thornton shot to his feet. Your Honor, I'm not finished. Crane's voice cracked like a whip. The burden of proof in such cases lies with the party claiming ownership. In this case, Rocky Mountain Railroad. That burden has not been met. The signature irregularities are significant. The conflicting witness statements regarding Samuel Hale's whereabouts create reasonable doubt. Without clear evidence, I cannot in good conscience evict Mr. Dawson Hale from property that has been in his family for 2 generations. Crane's gavel fell. I rule in favor of the defendant. Mr. Hale retains ownership and possession of the disputed property. Case dismissed. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Hargrove pumped his fist in the air. Dawson sat frozen, as if unable to believe what he'd heard. Thornton immediately began shouting about appeals. Samuel Hale slipped out a side door before anyone could confront him. Evelyn sat motionless, staring at Judge Crane. He'd ruled fairly. Despite their history, despite everything he'd done to her family, he'd followed the evidence and ruled fairly. Why? As people began filing out, Crane caught her eye and gave the slightest nod toward his chambers. Then he stood and disappeared through the door behind the bench. Evelyn looked at Dawson. He was shaking Hargrove's hand, accepting congratulations from supporters. He deserved this moment. She wouldn't interrupt it. She slipped away through the crowd and approached the door to the judge's chambers. Her hand trembled as she knocked. "Come in." Crane stood by the window, still in his robes, staring out at the street. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door, Miss Marlowe." She did, her heart hammering. They were alone. This man, this thief who destroyed everything, was now within arm's reach. "You recognized me," she said, "the moment you sat down in that courtroom." His voice was heavy, tired. "You have your mother's eyes." "Don't!" The word came out sharp. "Don't you dare speak of my mother." Crane finally turned. Up close, she could see how the years had worn on him. The gray in his hair wasn't distinguished. It was the mark of stress. The lines in his face weren't character. They were guilt etched in flesh. "I know what you think of me," he said quietly. "I know what I am." "Do you? Do you know that my father died believing he was a failure? That my mother coughed herself to death in a boarding house that smelled of cabbage and despair? That I lost everything, my home, my future, my family, because of what you did?" Yes. The single word held more weight than any explanation. "I know all of it." "Then how?" Evelyn's voice broke. "How do you stand there wearing a judge's robes? How do you pass judgment on others when you're a thief and a coward?" Crane moved to his desk and sat heavily. "I ran west with your father's money. I thought I'd buy a ranch, start over, become someone else. But the money, it went faster than I expected. Bad investments, gambling. Within a year, it was gone." "You squandered it." Evelyn felt sick. "Every penny. I ended up broke in a mining town, working claims for other men. I was nothing, no one." He looked up at her. "Then I met a man named Judge Harlan Forbes. He was circuit riding, hearing cases in towns too small for permanent courts. He saw something in me, God knows what, and took me on as a clerk, taught me law. When he died, he left me his books and recommended me for appointment." "So you stole a new life, too?" "Yes." Crane didn't deny it. "I won't insult you by claiming redemption or asking forgiveness. But I will tell you this. Every case I hear, I think of your father. Every time I put on these robes, I feel the weight of what I am. And I try, God help me, I try, to rule fairly, to give others the justice I denied your family." Evelyn wanted to scream at him, to rake her nails across his face, to see him suffer as her family had suffered. But looking at him now, this broken man in borrowed authority, she realized he was already suffering, had been for years, would continue to for whatever time he had left. "I testified truthfully today," she said coldly. "And you ruled based on the evidence. That's the only reason your secret is safe. I know. If I see you fail to serve justice, if I see you favor the powerful over the powerless, if I see you be anything less than the judge you claim to be, I will destroy you. I will tell everyone in this town exactly what you are." "I understand. Today you ruled correctly. Today you helped a good man keep his land. Do that again, and again, and again. Live the rest of your miserable life actually earning those robes." Crane nodded slowly. "That's all I can do now. Try to earn what I don't deserve." Evelyn turned toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. My father spent his last years trying to clear his name. The investigators eventually determined you were solely responsible, but by then the damage was done. People still whispered about him, still doubted. I know. Write a confession, a full, detailed confession of everything you did. Have it notarized. Send it to the Philadelphia authorities." She looked back at him. "Give my father his name back, even if it's too late for him to know it. I'll do it tonight." "Good." Evelyn left without another word, pulling the door closed behind her. Her hands were shaking, her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she held her head high as she walked back through the empty courtroom. She found Dawson waiting outside, leaning against the courthouse rail. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. He straightened when he saw her. "I thought maybe you'd left." "No, just finishing something." He studied her face, seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "Are you all right?" "I will be." She managed a small smile. "Congratulations on keeping your ranch." "Our ranch," he corrected quietly. "If you'll still have me." Evelyn looked at this man, This stranger who was supposed to be her future. He'd shown her strength and honor in the face of corruption. He'd fought for what was his without compromising his integrity. And he was offering her a partnership, not just a marriage of convenience. "I'll still have you," she said, "but we should probably spend some time getting to know each other first." Dawson's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Evelyn couldn't be certain, as it seemed like an expression he didn't wear often. "That seems wise, though I should warn you, I'm not much for fancy talk or social graces." "Good. I've had enough of fancy talk to last a lifetime." The ranch is 20 miles out, hard work from dawn to dusk. Cattle can be mean, the land is beautiful but unforgiving. Winters are brutal, I can't promise comfort or ease. "Mr. Hale," Evelyn said firmly, "I came west expecting a gentleman in a parlor. I'm not afraid of finding a rugged cowboy on a ranch instead." This time his smile was definite, if brief. "Then let's get you home." As they walked toward where his horse was tied, Evelyn cast one last glance back at the courthouse. Through a window, she could see Crane's silhouette hunched over his desk. She'd expected to feel triumph seeing her family's destroyer brought low and forced to confront his crimes. Instead, she felt only a strange emptiness, as if a weight she'd carried for years had suddenly lifted, leaving her lighter but also more hollow. Justice, she realized, wasn't the same as satisfaction. Truth wasn't the same as healing, but maybe it was a start. "Miss Marlowe?" Dawson had paused, waiting for her. Evelyn turned away from the courthouse and toward her future. Uncertain, challenging, but hers to choose. "I'm ready," she said, and realized, with some surprise, that she meant it. The ride back to town was quiet. Dawson had come in on horseback, but he arranged for a wagon to transport Evelyn's belongings to the ranch the next day. For now, she would spend one more night in her boarding house room. As they stood outside her door, Dawson shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "At courting, I suppose you'd call it." "Neither am I," Evelyn confessed. "I was engaged once, but it was all formal calls and chaperone visits. We never really talked." "Then maybe we start there, just talking." "I'd like that." They agreed he would return in the morning. As Evelyn watched him ride away, she felt the exhaustion of the day finally crash over her. Inside her small room, she sank onto the bed and let the tears finally come. For her father. For her mother. For the girl she'd been before Bramwell Crane stole her future. For the woman she was now, stronger, harder, but also more scarred. Tomorrow she would start a new life. Tonight, she mourned the old one. Outside her window, the sun set over Copper Ridge, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The day had brought victory, but both Evelyn and Dawson would soon learn that winning in court was only the beginning. The railroad didn't like losing, and men like Silas Rourke, the company's local agent, liked losing even less. In a saloon across town, Rourke sat at a table with three hard-eyed men, discussing how much it would cost to make a stubborn rancher change his mind about who owned his land. The real battle was just beginning. The morning brought rain, a cold, driving rain that turned the streets of Copper Ridge into rivers of mud. Evelyn woke to the sound of it hammering against her window, and for a moment she lay still, listening to the steady rhythm and wondering if this was an omen. The West seemed full of omens if you looked for them, though she wasn't sure she believed in such things anymore. She dressed carefully in her most practical clothes, a simple brown skirt and white blouse, sturdy boots that had seen her through the journey from Philadelphia. Her other dresses hung in the narrow wardrobe, fine things now out of place in her new life. She'd have to sell them eventually, she supposed. Ranch wives didn't need silk and lace. Dawson arrived exactly when he'd promised, riding through the downpour as if it were nothing more than a light mist. Water streamed from his hat brim as he dismounted and climbed the boarding house steps. Evelyn met him at the door. "Miserable day for travel," he said by way of greeting. "We can wait if you'd rather." "I'd rather not." Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter. "I'm ready to see where I'll be living." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. "All right then, wagon's coming with your things later. For now, you'll ride with me." He led her to where his horse stood, a massive bay gelding that regarded her with what seemed like skepticism. Dawson swung into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. You ever ridden double before? No. It's not complicated. I'll pull you up. You sit sideways in front of me. I'll keep you steady. Evelyn took his hand. His grip was calloused and strong, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. She settled awkwardly across the saddle, very aware of his arm around her waist, holding her secure against him. It was improper, intimate in a way that made her cheeks flush, but there was nothing suggestive in his touch, only practicality. Comfortable? His voice was close to her ear. As much as I can be. Then let's go home. They rode out of Copper Ridge into open country. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time they left the town behind. The landscape rolled away in endless waves of grass and sage, broken by rocky outcroppings and distant mountains that disappeared into low clouds. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that made Evelyn understand why Dawson fought so hard to keep it. How long have you lived here? She asked, needing to break the silence. All my life. My father came out in '49 chasing gold like everyone else. Didn't find any, but he found this valley and saw better wealth in grass and water. Built the ranch with his own hands. My mother died when I was 10. Fever took her one winter. Sam was 12. Dad raised us alone after that. And your father? Died 5 years ago. Heart gave out while he was mending fence. Dawson's voice was a matter of fact, but Evelyn heard the old grief beneath it. Sam inherited as the oldest son, but he never wanted ranch life. He lasted 6 months before taking off for Denver, left me to run everything. But legally the land was still his. Legally, yes, which is why what he did, selling it or pretending to sell it, whichever version is true, hurt so bad. Dawson was quiet for a moment. Not just the betrayal, though that was bad enough, but knowing he never valued what our father built, never understood what it meant. What does it mean to you? Everything. The word came out fierce, almost angry, then he softened. Sorry, I don't mean to sound... No, I understand. I think I'm starting to anyway. Evelyn watched the land roll past. My father built something too. Not land, but a business. A legacy. When it was taken from him, it killed him as surely as a bullet would have. Some men are tied to what they create. Losing it means losing themselves. Dawson's arm tightened slightly around her waist. Whether in comfort or acknowledgement, she couldn't tell. They rode on through the gray morning. The ranch appeared gradually, emerging from the landscape rather than standing apart from it. First came the fences, well-maintained lines of split rail marking boundaries. Then cattle in the distance, dark shapes against wet grass. Finally, the buildings themselves, a main house of weathered wood with a wide porch, a barn that had seen better days but still stood solid, several outbuildings scattered around a central yard. It wasn't grand. It wasn't even particularly pretty, but it looked real and honest, built for function rather than display. Home, Dawson said simply. As they rode into the yard, men emerged from the barn, 3 ranch hands moving with the efficient purpose of people who had work waiting. One of them, an older man with a face like tanned leather, was Colt, the foreman who'd met Evelyn at the stage. Boss, Colt nodded to Dawson, then tipped his hat to Evelyn. Ma'am, welcome to the Double H. Thank you. Dawson dismounted and helped Evelyn down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. He steadied her without comment. Everything quiet while I was gone? He asked Colt. Quiet enough, though there's signs someone was up on the North Ridge last night, found boot prints near the overlook. Dawson's expression darkened. How many? 2, maybe 3. They weren't trying too hard to hide their tracks. Which means they wanted us to know they were watching. Dawson looked toward the northern hills, now hidden in mist. Railroad? That'd be my guess. Silas Rourke's boys, probably. They're not taking the court decision well. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. Will they try something? Hard to say, ma'am, Colt replied. Railroad usually likes to stay legal-like, but they don't like losing, and they've got some rough men working for them. Show Miss Marlowe inside, Dawson said. Get her warm and dry. I want to check those tracks myself. Dawson. Evelyn touched his arm before thinking better of it. Should you go alone? I'll take Colt, Besides, if they wanted violence, they'd have done more than leave boot prints. He met her eyes. Don't worry, I've dealt with railroad tactics before. But Evelyn did worry as she watched him stride toward the barn with Colt. This victory they'd won in court suddenly felt fragile, temporary. Men who could afford lawyers could afford worse things too. One of the other ranch hands, a young man named Pete, who couldn't have been more than 20, led her to the main house. The interior was as practical as the exterior, clean but spare, with furniture that was sturdy rather than decorative. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Stairs led up to what she assumed were bedrooms. It ain't fancy, Pete said apologetically. Boss never saw much point in frills. It's fine. And it was, in its way. Honest, like everything else here. I'll get a fire going, take the chill off. Pete moved to the hearth with practiced efficiency. You settle in, ma'am. Your room's upstairs, first door on the right. Boss figured you'd want your own space until things are more settled between you two. Evelyn appreciated Dawson's thoughtfulness more than she could express to this young ranch hand. She climbed the narrow stairs and found the room Pete had indicated. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a single window overlooking the yard. Her trunk from the boarding house hadn't arrived yet, but someone had laid out fresh linens and towels. She stood at the window, watching the rain and waiting for Dawson to return. Minutes stretched into an hour. The fire Pete had built crackled cheerfully below, but Evelyn couldn't shake her unease. Finally, she heard horses in the yard. She hurried downstairs to find Dawson and Colt removing their slickers, both men's expressions grim. What did you find? More than boot prints. Dawson moved to the fire, warming his hands. They'd been there a while, watching the ranch, left cigar butts, empty whiskey bottle, making a point. What point? That they can get close whenever they want, that we're being watched. He turned to face her. Miss Marlowe, Evelyn, I need to be straight with you. Winning that court case might have made things harder instead of easier. The railroad has money and influence. If they decide to make this personal, I'm not afraid of bullies, Evelyn interrupted. I've dealt with worse than railroad agents. Have you dealt with men who set fires? Who stampede cattle? Who shoot at people from hiding? Dawson's voice was flat. Because that's what we might be facing. I won't sugarcoat it. This could get dangerous. Then it gets dangerous. Evelyn lifted her chin. I didn't come all this way to run at the first sign of trouble. Something shifted in Dawson's expression. A wall coming down, perhaps, or a decision being made. All right, but you need to learn some things. How to shoot, for one. How to handle yourself if trouble comes. I can learn. Good. He glanced out the window at the rain, which had picked up again. We'll start tomorrow if the weather clears. For now, you should rest. It's been a hard few days for you. But rest proved elusive. Evelyn spent the afternoon exploring the house, familiarizing herself with the kitchen and its supplies, taking mental inventory of what needed doing. The place was clean but showed signs of being maintained by men who saw housework as a necessary chore rather than a craft. Dishes were stacked haphazardly. Clothing needed mending. Windows wanted washing. She found herself oddly grateful for the work that waited. It gave her purpose, a way to make this place hers. That evening, the ranch hands came in for supper. Evelyn had found the makings of a simple meal, salt pork, beans, biscuits, and surprised everyone by having it ready when they arrived. The men ate with the efficiency of people more interested in fuel than flavor, but she caught several grateful glances. This is good, ma'am, said Jake, the third ranch hand, a quiet man in his 40s. Real good. We usually just fry up whatever's closest and call it done. I'm happy to cook if someone shows me where everything is kept. I'm afraid I don't know your routines yet. We'll teach you, Colt assured her, and you'll teach us to eat civilized-like again. Fair trade. Dawson said little during the meal, but Evelyn noticed him watching her as she moved around the kitchen, serving the men and refilling coffee cups. When everyone had finished, she started gathering dishes. Leave those. Dawson stood. You've done enough for your first day. I don't mind. Leave them. His tone was gentle but firm. We're not going to work you into the ground your first night here. Go upstairs. Rest. Tomorrow will be long enough. Evelyn wanted to argue but recognized the futility. These men had their own rhythms, their own ways. She'd have to learn when to push and when to yield. She climbed the stairs to her small room, changed into her nightgown, and lay in the narrow bed listening to the low murmur of male voices from below. The rain had stopped, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the eaves. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. This was her life now. This rough house, this hard land, these men who were strangers but would become her family if she let them. She fell asleep wondering if she'd made the right choice, and woke in the deep of night to something that made her blood freeze. Wolves. Not the lonely howl of coyotes, but the chorus of a pack, close and getting closer. And beneath that sound, another, cattle lowing in distress, the thunder of hooves as the herd spooked and ran. Evelyn threw off her blanket and rushed to the window. In the moonlight that had broken through the clouds, she could see shapes moving in the pasture beyond the barn. Cattle running in panic, and darker shapes flowing alongside them. A wolf pack taking advantage of the chaos to bring down vulnerable animals. Below she heard shouting, doors slammed, men's voices calling orders. She dressed hurriedly, pulling on her clothes with shaking hands, and ran downstairs. The main room was empty, but through the open door she could see lanterns bobbing in the darkness as the ranch hands rushed toward the pasture. She grabbed her shawl and ran out onto the porch. "Miss Marlowe, get back inside!" Pete's voice carried from near the barn. But Evelyn had already seen Dawson running toward the chaos, rifle in hand, and something in her refused to hide while others faced danger. She spotted a lantern hanging by the door and grabbed it, lighting it with hands that trembled only slightly. "I'm coming with you," she called back to Pete. "Ma'am, that's not—" "I won't get in the way, but you need all the light you can get." She didn't wait for permission. She ran toward the pasture, holding the lantern high. The wolves had taken down 2 calves already. She could see the dark shapes on the ground, the pack tearing at flesh. The rest of the herd milled in terror, too panicked to run in any organized direction. Shots cracked in the night. Dawson and Jake were firing at the wolves, trying to drive them off without hitting cattle in the chaos. Colt was trying to turn the herd, get them moving away from the predators. Evelyn reached the fence line and climbed up on the bottom rail, holding her lantern as high as she could. The light pushed back the darkness, illuminating the scene more clearly. She saw a wolf separate from the pack, circling around toward where Dawson stood reloading his rifle. "Behind you!" she screamed. Dawson spun, brought the rifle up, and fired in one smooth motion. The wolf dropped mid-leap, landing in a heap 10 feet from him. The pack, sensing the odds turning against them, melted back into the darkness. The cattle continued running, but their panic was subsiding. Colt's efforts to turn them were working. Gradually, the chaos resolved into order. The herd slowed, bunched together for protection. The remaining wolves vanished into the night. The men lowered their weapons and began taking stock of the damage. Dawson walked toward Evelyn, his face grim in the lamplight. "I told you to stay inside. You needed light. I needed you safe. I was safe. I stayed behind the fence." She climbed down from the rail, her legs suddenly weak now that the adrenaline was fading. "Are the cattle all right?" "Lost 2 calves. Could have been worse." He took the lantern from her hand. She hadn't realized how badly she was shaking until he steadied it. "Could have been a lot worse. I'm sorry. I know I should have listened." "No," he interrupted her apology. "You did right. We needed that light, and you kept your head. You didn't panic." He looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Most women would have. I'm not most women. I'm starting to see that." He glanced back at the pasture where the other men were checking the herd. "Come on, let's get you back to the house. Nothing more to do out here tonight." They walked back across the yard in silence. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn wasn't far off. Evelyn realized she'd have maybe an hour or 2 to rest before the day truly began. At the porch steps, Dawson paused. "When I saw you run out here, with that wolf pack close, I've never been that scared in my life." "You barely know me." "Doesn't seem to matter." He met her eyes. "You came into my life 3 days ago. Yesterday you stood up in court and risked everything to help me. Tonight you ran toward danger instead of hiding from it. I don't need to know you longer to know you're someone worth protecting." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I can protect myself." I know, but maybe we protect each other. That's what partners do, isn't it? Is that what we are? Partners? I think that's what we're becoming. He touched her arm briefly. Get some rest. Real day starts in a few hours. But when Evelyn climbed back into her narrow bed, sleep wouldn't come. Her mind spun with images of wolves and darkness, of Dawson turning and firing in one fluid motion, of the way he'd looked at her just now, not as a burden or a stranger, but as someone who belonged. She'd expected to find a gentleman in a parlor. She'd found a rugged cowboy on a ranch instead. And somehow, impossibly, that felt exactly right. The next days fell into patterns that began to feel like life rather than temporary arrangement. Evelyn learned the rhythms of the ranch, the early rising, the endless work, the way men moved around each other with practiced efficiency. She took over the cooking completely, finding satisfaction in providing good meals. She mended clothes and organized the chaos of bachelor living. She learned to read weather signs and cattle behavior. And in the evenings, after supper, Dawson taught her to shoot. They started with an old pistol, teaching her to load and aim and fire at bottles set on fence posts. Her first attempts were clumsy, the gun kicking in her hand, shots going wild. But Evelyn had never been one to give up easily. She practiced until her hands ached, until she could hit the bottles more often than she missed. "You're a natural," Dawson said after a week of lessons. "Better than most men I've taught." I have good motivation to learn." Evelyn reloaded carefully. "After seeing those wolves, it's not just wolves out here." His expression was serious. "There's been more signs of watchers on the ridges, and yesterday Jake found 3 of our water barrels had been slashed, all the water drained out." Evelyn's hands stilled on the gun. "The railroad? Who else? They're trying to make life difficult, make us think twice about staying." He took the pistol from her, checked it, handed it back. "It's going to get worse before it gets better." "Then we'd better be ready." That night, Evelyn lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep and thought about what Dawson had said. The railroad was escalating. Water barrels today. What tomorrow? She remembered the cold efficiency of their lawyers in court, the way they'd brought Samuel Hale forward like a weapon. These were men who didn't accept defeat gracefully. She must have eventually fallen asleep because she woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. Evelyn bolted upright, heart pounding. Gray light filtered through her window, dawn, or close to it. She ran to look out and saw flames licking at one of the outbuildings, black smoke billowing into the morning sky. She dressed frantically and ran downstairs. The yard was chaos. Men forming a bucket brigade from the well, Dawson directing them with calm urgency. The building was already lost, but they were working to keep the fire from spreading. Evelyn joined the line without being asked, passing buckets of water forward and empty buckets back. Her arms burned. Smoke stung her eyes. But slowly, painfully, they contained the blaze. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, the fire was out. The outbuilding, a storage shed for extra tack and supplies, was gone, reduced to charred timbers and ash. The men stood around it, exhausted and filthy with soot. Found this nailed to the barn door. Colt handed Dawson a piece of paper. Dawson read it, his jaw clenching. Then he passed it to Evelyn without a word. The message was brief. Sell or leave or if. This is your last warning. They're done being subtle, Colt said quietly. Fire's a declaration. Then we make our own declaration. Dawson's voice was hard as iron. We're not selling, we're not leaving, and if they want to fight, they'll get one. Boss, we're 4 men against however many the railroad wants to pay. Those aren't good odds. No, but they're the odds we've got. Dawson turned to his men. Any of you want to leave, do it now. I won't think less of you. This is my fight, not yours. Jake and Pete exchanged glances. Colt just shook his head. We're staying, Colt said simply. This is our home too. Mine as well, Evelyn added. All the men looked at her. What? You think I came all this way to run from threats? I meant what I said before. I'm not afraid of bullies. Dawson studied her face for a long moment. This isn't a game anymore, Evelyn. People could die. I know. She met his eyes steadily. But some things are worth dying for. Isn't that what you told me? That this land means everything? It does. But you don't have to... Yes, I do. She surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. This is my home now too, our home, and I'll fight for it just like the rest of you. Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, a commitment deeper than words. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The day after the fire, 3 riders appeared on the eastern ridge. They sat their horses for an hour, watching the ranch, then disappeared. The next day, shots rang out from a different direction, shattering windows in the barn. No one was hit, but the message was clear. They could reach into the ranch whenever they wanted. Dawson doubled the watch at night. Men slept in shifts, rifles close at hand. Evelyn moved through the days in a state of controlled tension, jumping at sudden sounds, always aware of the ridges surrounding them. "They're trying to break our nerves," Dawson said at supper one evening. "Make us so afraid we leave voluntarily." "It's working," Pete admitted quietly. "I ain't ashamed to say I'm scared." "Being scared is smart," Colt said. "Being stupid is running. Difference between the two matters." On the 8th day after the court ruling, Dawson came to Evelyn as she worked in the kitchen. "I want to show you something. Will you ride out with me?" "Of course." They saddled horses. Evelyn had learned to ride properly now, though she was still far from graceful. They headed north, away from the ranch buildings and into the valley that opened between 2 lines of hills. It was beautiful country. A stream ran through the center of the valley, lined with cottonwoods. Grass grew thick and green despite the dry season. Cattle grazed peacefully under the vast blue sky. "This is why," Dawson said simply. "This is what they're trying to take." Evelyn understood. It wasn't just land, it was life itself. The ability to build something lasting and meaningful. Her father had felt the same way about his business. Some things were worth fighting for because without them, you weren't fully alive. "It's beautiful," she said. "My father used to bring me here when I was young. He'd say that a man who owns land owns a piece of forever, that long after we're gone, this valley will still be here, and it'll matter that we protected it." He was right. "I think he'd have liked you." Dawson glanced at her. "He always said the women who came west were tougher than the men because they chose this life knowing how hard it would be." Before Evelyn could respond, the crack of a rifle split the air. The bullet hit the ground between their horses. Both animals reared in panic. Evelyn clung to her saddle horn as her mare danced sideways. Another shot cracked, closer this time. "Ride!" Dawson shouted. They kicked their horses into a run, racing back toward a stand of cottonwoods that offered cover. Bullets chased them, kicking up dirt, whining past their heads. Evelyn bent low over her mare's neck, terror and fury warring in her chest. They reached the trees and flung themselves from their horses. Dawson pulled Evelyn behind the largest cottonwood trunk, shielding her with his body as more shots rang out. "How many?" she gasped. "At least 2 shooters, different positions." He checked his rifle, cursing. "They planned this. Drove us toward this spot deliberately. What do we do? Wait. Hope they run out of ammunition or patience." He looked down at her, his face very close to hers. "You hit?" "No. You?" "No." They pressed against the tree as bullets continued to tear through the leaves above them. Evelyn could feel Dawson's heart pounding against her back, could smell smoke and leather and sweat. His arm was locked around her waist, holding her tight against him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is my fault. I shouldn't have brought you out here. I chose to come." "Still!" Another volley of shots cut him off. One bullet struck the tree trunk inches from Evelyn's head, showering them with bark splinters. Then, suddenly, the shooting stopped. They waited in tense silence, hardly breathing. Minutes passed. A bird called from a nearby tree. The stream gurgled over stones. "They're gone," Dawson said finally. "Probably spooked by something. Or they're waiting for us to come out. That too." He didn't release her. "We'll wait a bit longer to be sure." They stood there in the shade of the cottonwood, pressed together, both still shaking with adrenaline. Evelyn became acutely aware of how improper this position was, and how little she cared. Dawson had thrown himself between her and danger without hesitation. Whatever else happened, she would remember that. "When I first wrote that advertisement," Dawson said quietly, "I was looking for someone practical. someone who could manage a household and wouldn't complain about isolation. I never expected... What? This. You. He pulled back slightly so he could look at her face. You've been here less than 2 weeks, and you're already braver than most men I know. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Being brave means doing what needs doing despite being terrified. His hand came up to touch her cheek, gentle, despite the calluses. Evelyn, if something had happened to you just now, but it didn't. This time. His expression was troubled. Next time we might not be so lucky. Then we'd better make sure there isn't a next time. Evelyn pulled away from him, checking her horse. The mare had calmed. We need to end this. The railroad, Silas Rourke, all of it. No more waiting for them to strike. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way to fight back without just defending all the time. They rode back to the ranch slowly, watchful for more ambushes. None came. When they arrived, they found Colt waiting with news. 3 riders came by while you were gone. Railroad men. Left a message that Silas Rourke wants to meet with you tomorrow. Neutral ground. Just talk. It's a trap, Dawson said immediately. Probably, Colt agreed. But what if it's not? What if they're ready to negotiate? After shooting at us? Could be different factions. The lawyers wanting one thing, the enforcers wanting another. Colt shrugged. Worth considering, at least. Dawson looked at Evelyn. What do you think? She was surprised he asked. I think we should go, but carefully, with witnesses and protection. If I go, you stay here where it's safe. No. The word came out sharp and certain. If this is about our ranch, we face it together. That's what partners do, remember? That night, as Evelyn lay in her narrow bed, she heard footsteps on the stairs. A soft knock at her door. It's me, Dawson's voice came through the wood. Can we talk? She wrapped her shawl around her nightgown and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, looking exhausted and uncertain. I need to say something, he began, then stopped. Started again. When we were behind that tree today and bullets were flying, all I could think was that I'd brought this on you, that you came west expecting safety and peace, and instead you found danger and violence. I came west expecting nothing, Evelyn corrected gently, just hoping for a chance at something new, and I found more than I expected, land worth fighting for, people worth protecting, and she hesitated, then continued, and a man who's shown me more honor and respect in 2 weeks than I received in 23 years back east. Dawson stepped closer. I'm not good with words, Evelyn. Never have been. But I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow or next week or next year, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you stayed, even with everything that's happened. So am I. And she meant it, surprising herself again with the depth of that truth. They stood in the dim hallway, close enough to touch, but not touching, both aware that they were standing on the edge of something that would change everything. Tomorrow, Dawson said finally. We'll face tomorrow together. Together, Evelyn agreed. He left her then, disappearing back down the stairs. Evelyn closed her door and leaned against it, her heart racing. She had come west hoping for peace. She'd found wolves and fire and bullets instead. But she'd also found courage she didn't know she possessed, and a connection to a rough cowboy that felt more real than anything in her carefully ordered past. Tomorrow, they would meet with Silas Rourke. Tomorrow, they might find peace or escalation, negotiation or war. But tonight, Evelyn fell asleep knowing that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The meeting place was a clearing halfway between the ranch and Copper Ridge, neutral ground where neither side held advantage. Dawson insisted they arrive early, and they did, a full hour before the appointed time. He positioned Jake and Pete in the rocks above the clearing with rifles, while Colt stayed with the horses at the tree line. Only Dawson and Evelyn would walk into the open space to meet Rourke. You could still wait with the horses, Dawson said for the 3rd time that morning. And you could stop asking me to, Evelyn replied. She checked the small pistol hidden in her skirt pocket, the one Dawson had given her after their shooting lessons began. The weight of it was oddly comforting. They stood in the morning sun, waiting. The clearing was peaceful, almost mockingly so. Wildflowers dotted the grass. A hawk circled overhead. Nothing suggested violence or confrontation. Then riders appeared from the east, 3 of them. Silas Rourke was easy to identify even at a distance. He sat his horse like a man who'd never done real work, spine too straight, posture too perfect. The 2 men flanking him were different, hard-eyed and dangerous, the kind who wore guns low on their hips and knew how to use them. The riders entered the clearing and dismounted. Rourke walked forward, his expensive boots crunching on dry grass. He was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 40, with carefully groomed hair and a suit that must have cost more than most men made in a year. His smile was practiced and empty. "Mr. Hale, thank you for agreeing to meet." His eyes slid to Evelyn. "And you must be the famous Miss Marlowe, the handwriting expert who cost my company a rather expensive piece of property." "Mrs. Hale, soon enough," Evelyn said coolly, "and I didn't cost your company anything. I simply told the truth about a forged document." Rourke's smile never wavered. "Ah, yes, the truth. Such a flexible concept, don't you find?" He turned back to Dawson. "Let's dispense with pleasantries. You know why I asked for this meeting." "I can guess. You want me gone. The Rocky Mountain Railroad wants what it paid for. We gave your brother good money for this land." "My brother didn't have the right to sell it. The court agreed." "The court," Rourke said the word like a curse, "made a temporary decision based on questionable evidence. We're appealing, of course, but appeals take time, and time costs money. So I'm here to make you an offer." "I'm listening." "Sell us the ranch. We'll pay double what we gave Samuel. You can buy land elsewhere, start fresh without all this unpleasantness." "Unpleasantness." Dawson's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean the fire? The slashed water barrels? The shooting 2 days ago?" Rourke spread his hands. "Regrettable incidents. The West can be a dangerous place. Accidents happen, but they could stop happening if we reach an understanding." "That's a threat." "That's reality, Mr. Hale. The railroad is coming through this valley whether you like it or not. We have investors, deadlines, political backing. One stubborn rancher won't stop progress." Rourke's smile hardened. "You can profit from that progress, or you can be crushed by it. Your choice." Evelyn felt Dawson's tension like a physical thing. His hand rested near his gun, not threatening, but ready. She knew he wanted to refuse outright, to tell Rourke exactly where he could put his offer. But he kept his voice level. "This land has been in my family for 26 years. My father built it from nothing. He's buried on that land, along with my mother. Every fence post, every building, every blade of grass represents work and sacrifice and dreams." Dawson met Rourke's eyes. "So, no, I'm not selling, not for double money, not for triple, not for any amount you could offer." "That's unfortunate," Rourke sighed as if genuinely disappointed, "because the alternative is much less pleasant for everyone." "Is that another threat?" "It's a prediction." Rourke glanced at his 2 companions, who'd remained silent throughout the exchange. "My employers want that land. They'll get it eventually, one way or another. The easy way is you selling and walking away rich. The hard way—" He left the sentence unfinished. "The hard way gets people hurt," Evelyn said sharply. "Including your men. We're not defenseless." Rourke's attention shifted to her, and his smile took on a different quality, something calculating and cold. "Mrs. Hale-to-be, I admire your loyalty to your intended, but you should understand what you're defending. This ranch is dying. The water sources are inadequate. The cattle barely survive the winters. Your future husband is holding on to a losing proposition out of pure stubbornness." "That's a lie," Dawson said flatly. "This ranch turns a profit every year. The water's more than adequate. You want it because your railroad road is cheaper through my valley than around it. This isn't about helping me. It's about saving your boss's money." "Business is business, Mr. Hale." "Then here's my business decision. Get off my land and don't come back." The 2 gunmen shifted positions subtly. Evelyn's hand moved to her pocket, fingers closing around the pistol grip. Above them, hidden in the rocks, she knew Jake and Pete would be tracking every movement. Rourke held up a placating hand. "Gentlemen, let's not be hasty. Mr. Hale, Think about what you're protecting. Buildings can burn, cattle can stampede or be rustled. Accidents happen to people too, not just property. His eyes flicked to Evelyn. Especially to people who aren't used to frontier dangers. Dawson moved faster than Evelyn had ever seen him move. One moment he was standing still, the next his hand was locked around Rourke's throat, lifting the smaller man onto his toes. You threaten my property, fine. You threaten me, I can handle it. But if you or anyone working for you touches her... Dawson's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout. I will hunt down every man involved and make them wish they'd never heard my name. The gunmen reached for their weapons. Immediately, shots cracked from the rocks above, warning shots that kicked up dirt at their feet. The men froze. My men have you both in their sights, Dawson said, still holding Rourke. Jake up there fought in the war. He can put a bullet through your eye at this distance without breaking a sweat. Pete's younger, but he's learning fast. So I suggest you stand very still. Rourke's face had gone red, but he managed to choke out words. You're making a mistake. No, the mistake would be letting you walk out of here thinking I'm afraid of you. Dawson released him, shoving him backward. Take your men and leave. And tell your bosses that every acre of this ranch will be defended. Every fence line, every water source, every blade of grass. You want it? Come and take it. But understand that taking it will cost you more than it's worth. Rourke rubbed his throat, his composure cracking for the first time. Anger flashed in his eyes. You'll regret this. I doubt it. Your ranch will burn to the ground. Your cattle will die. And when you're broken and begging, we'll take the land anyway, but we won't pay you a penny for it. Then I guess we'll see who breaks first. Dawson's hand rested on his gun. You're done talking. Leave now, while you still can. Rourke jerked his head at his men. They backed toward their horses, hands carefully away from their weapons, eyes scanning the rocks for the hidden riflemen. Rourke mounted with as much dignity as he could manage, though his hands shook with rage. This isn't over, Hale. No, Dawson agreed. It's just beginning. They watched the three riders disappear toward Copper Ridge. Only when they were out of sight did Dawson's shoulders slump slightly. He turned to Evelyn, his expression troubled. I shouldn't have lost my temper. Gave him ammunition. He was threatening me. You had every right. Rights don't matter much out here. Only consequences. He signaled to the rocks, and Jake and Pete emerged from their hiding spots. We just declared war on the railroad. They'll hit us hard now. Jake joined them, rifle still in hand. That Rourke fellow, he's not the type to forgive being choked in front of his men. He'll want revenge for the embarrassment as much as for the business. I know. Dawson looked toward his ranch, invisible beyond the hills but present in his mind. We need to prepare. Fortify the buildings, increase patrols, maybe hire more men if we can afford it. I know some boys in town who might sign on, Pete offered. Good men, steady hands. Talk to them, offer fair wages, but be honest about the danger. Dawson turned to Evelyn. And you need to decide if you want to stay for this. We've had this conversation. I'm staying. That was before I grabbed Rourke by the throat and made this personal. This is different now. This is war, Evelyn finished. You said it yourself, and partners don't abandon each other in war. She surprised herself by taking his hand. I'm not leaving, Dawson. However bad this gets, I'm not leaving. His fingers tightened around hers. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both. They rode back to the ranch in formation, Dawson and Evelyn in the center. The other men spread out as guards. Every ridge, every stand of trees could hide enemies now. The peace of the morning felt like a memory from another lifetime. Back at the ranch, they held a council of war. Colt listened to their account of the meeting, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. So we're officially under siege, he said when they finished. Question is, what do we do about it? We can't just sit and wait for them to hit us, Jake said. That's letting them choose the time and place. But we can't attack them either, Dawson countered. They're a legal company. We start shooting at railroad men. We become the criminals. So we're stuck playing defense. Not entirely. Evelyn had been thinking while the men talked. Rourke wants this to be about violence and intimidation, because that's where he has the advantage. But we beat them once before using truth and evidence. Maybe we can do it again. The court already ruled in our favor, Colt pointed out, but the fight isn't really legal anymore. It's political and economic. Evelyn thought of her father's business, the way deals were made and broken. The railroad has investors, Rourke said. People who've put money into this project, expecting returns. What if those investors knew how much the railroad is spending on harassment and threats? How many other ranchers they've pushed out illegally? Dawson's eyes lit with understanding. You're talking about exposing them, making their tactics public. More than that, making their tactics expensive. Investors hate bad publicity and unexpected costs. If we can document what's happening here, the fire, the shooting, the threats, and get that information to newspapers, to other ranchers, to anyone who'll listen, we turn the railroad's strength into weakness, Colt finished. Their size and visibility works against them. It's a long shot, Jake said skeptically. Newspapers don't care much about one ranch's troubles. They might care about a pattern of illegal intimidation across multiple ranches, and I'd bet we're not the only ones Rourke has threatened. Evelyn looked at Dawson. What if we could find others, build a case showing systematic harassment? That would take time, and we might not have time. But Dawson was considering it. Still, it's better than just waiting for them to burn us out. We do both, Colt suggested. Fortify for defense while working on exposing them. 2 fronts of attack. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Windows were barricaded, extra ammunition was distributed. A watch schedule was established so the ranch would never be unguarded. Pete rode to town to recruit help and to start asking quietly about other ranchers who'd had trouble with the railroad. Evelyn worked alongside the men, helping to move supplies and reinforce weak points in the barn. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and red, she found herself on the porch with Dawson, both of them taking a brief rest. My father used to say that sunset was God's way of reminding us that even difficult days end, she said quietly. Wise man, your father. He was. He deserved better than what happened to him. Dawson glanced at her. The judge, Crane. He's part of your past, isn't he? More than you've said. Evelyn had been waiting for him to ask, wondering how much to reveal. But after everything they'd been through together, secrets felt wrong. He destroyed my family, she said simply. Then, because he deserved the whole truth, she told him the story. Her father's partnership with Crane. The theft. The ruin and shame. Her parents' deaths. The years of struggling alone. Dawson listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So when you stood up in that courtroom and testified, you were facing the man who killed your parents. Not directly, but yes. And he ruled in my favor anyway. He ruled according to the evidence. I'm still not sure why. Guilt, maybe. Or fear that I'd expose him if he didn't. Evelyn shrugged. Does the reason matter? I suppose not. But it means you've already fought one war and won. He turned to look at her fully. You're stronger than you think, Evelyn. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified most of the time. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her face. I'm glad you're here. Even with everything that's happened, even with everything still to come. I'm glad. Evelyn leaned into his touch, letting herself take comfort in his presence. So am I. The moment broke when Colt called from the barn. They pulled apart, returning to preparations. But something had shifted between them. Some barrier dissolved. They worked side by side as the light faded, and when their hands brushed in passing, neither pulled away. Night fell with a tension that made the air feel thick. The watch was divided into 4 shifts. Colt took the first, Jake the second, Pete the third, and Dawson the fourth, just before dawn. Evelyn tried to sleep but found herself lying awake, listening to every sound. Around midnight, she heard it, the low rumble of many hooves, growing closer. She ran to the window and saw them coming across the pasture in the moonlight. Riders, at least a dozen of them, driving the cattle before them in a stampede aimed straight at the ranch buildings. Dawson! She screamed his name as she ran for the stairs. They're stampeding the herd! The house exploded into action. Men grabbed rifles and rushed outside. Evelyn followed, her heart in her throat. The thunder of hooves was deafening now. She could see the cattle in the moonlight, a dark wave of muscle and horn bearing down on them. Dawson and Colt ran toward the oncoming herd, firing shots into the air, trying to turn them. Jake and Pete positioned themselves at angles, adding their gunfire to the attempt to redirect the stampede. But the cattle were too panicked, driven too hard. They kept coming. "The barn!" Dawson shouted. "Get behind the barn!" Evelyn ran, her skirts hampering her movement. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. Behind her, the cattle were close enough that she could hear their labored breathing, could smell the dust and terror. Strong hands grabbed her, pulled her behind the solid bulk of the barn just as the herd thundered past. The building shook from the impact of bodies slamming against it. Wood cracked. Somewhere, glass shattered. It was Dawson who held her, his body pressed against hers, shielding her from the chaos. They stood frozen as the stampede roared past, seeming to last forever, but probably only taking seconds. Then it was over. The cattle spread out across the ranch property, gradually slowing, their panic subsiding. "Everyone alive?" Dawson called. "Here," Colt answered from near the house. "Alive," Jake confirmed. Pete didn't answer immediately. Dawson's grip on Evelyn tightened. "Pete!" "I'm here." The young man's voice came from near the corral. "Got knocked down, but nothing broken." They emerged from cover to assess the damage. The barn had held, though several boards were cracked. One corner of the house porch had been destroyed where cattle had crashed into it. Fencing was down in multiple places. But miraculously, no one was seriously hurt. "The riders," Colt said, pointing to the eastern ridge. "They're still watching." Evelyn could see them silhouetted against the star-filled sky. A line of horsemen, too far away to identify, but close enough to send a message. They'd driven the cattle into the ranch, and now they waited to see the results. "They wanted to scare us," Dawson said. "Maybe kill someone if they got lucky. Definitely cause damage." "It worked," Jake muttered. "I'm plenty scared." "Being scared is smart. Running is stupid." Dawson raised his rifle and fired 3 shots into the air, not at the distant riders, but a signal. A declaration that they were still standing, still fighting. After a moment, the riders on the ridge turned and disappeared into the darkness. "He'll be back," Colt said quietly. "I know, but not tonight. They've made their point for now." Dawson lowered his rifle. "Let's round up the cattle we can find. The rest will have to wait for daylight." They worked through the night, exhausted and shaken, but refusing to give in to fear. Evelyn helped where she could, holding lanterns and opening gates. Her whole body ached. Her dress was torn and filthy, but she kept moving, kept working. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they gathered in the yard to count the cost. 30 head of cattle were missing, either run off too far to find immediately or stolen by the raiders. The damage to buildings would take days to repair. They'd lost precious sleep and energy they could ill afford to waste. But they were alive. They were still here. Dawson stood in the center of the yard, looking at his exhausted, filthy crew. "Anyone wants to leave, now's the time. No shame in it. This is only going to get worse." No one moved. "We're with you, boss," Colt said simply. "To the end, whatever that looks like." Jake and Pete nodded agreement. Evelyn stepped forward to stand beside Dawson. "All of us," she said. "Together." The next days brought an escalation that made the earlier harassment seem gentle. Fences were cut in the night, letting cattle wander. Someone poisoned one of the water sources, killing 3 steers before they could stop the others from drinking. Shots came from the ridges at odd hours, keeping everyone on edge, never quite hitting anyone, but making sleep impossible. Pete returned from town with mixed news. He'd found 2 men willing to help, ranch hands who'd lost their own jobs when their employer sold out to the railroad. They arrived the next day, brothers named Tom and Will Garrett, both young and tough and angry enough to fight. But Pete also brought word that several other ranchers had given up and sold. The railroad was winning its war of attrition. Each family that left made the remaining holdouts more isolated, more vulnerable. "There's a meeting being organized," Pete reported. "Some of the ranchers who haven't sold yet. They want to talk about banding together, presenting a united front." "When?" 3 days from now. In Copper Ridge, at the church. We'll be there. Dawson looked at his expanded crew. All of us. Show them we're not backing down. Those 3 days were among the hardest Evelyn had ever experienced. The ranch was under constant pressure. They slept in shifts, ate in shifts, worked until exhaustion made them stumble. And through it all, the watchers on the ridges remained, silent witnesses to their struggle. On the second night, Evelyn woke to find Dawson sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the dark land. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and joined him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Seems like a waste of time when I should be watching." "We have 4 men on watch. You need rest too." He didn't answer for a moment, then quietly, "I keep thinking about what my father would do, whether he'd approve of this fight or think I'm being stubborn and stupid." "What do you think he'd do?" "Fight. Until his last breath, he'd fight for this land." Dawson's voice was rough. But he never had to worry about getting someone else killed in the process. He never had a woman to protect, never had hired hands depending on his decisions. "We're not your responsibility alone, Dawson. Each of us chose to stay. You chose based on what I told you, about partnership and facing things together, but I didn't know it would get this bad this fast." Evelyn took his hand. "Listen to me. I'm not some fragile thing that needs constant protecting. I've survived worse than Silas Rourke and his hired guns. I lost everything once before. My family, my home, my entire future. I rebuilt myself from nothing. I can do it again if I have to. I don't want you to have to. Neither do I. But if it comes to that, I'm strong enough." She squeezed his hand. "And I'm not leaving. Stop expecting me to." He turned to look at her, his face barely visible in the starlight. "You really mean that? Every word." "Then I have something to ask you." He stood, pulling her up with him. "This isn't romantic. There's no flowers or poetry. But circumstances being what they are, I don't want to wait any longer." Evelyn's heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" "Marry me. Tomorrow, before we go to that meeting. I want us to be officially partners, legally bound, before whatever comes next." His hands tightened on hers. "I can't promise you safety or comfort. Can't promise we'll even survive this fight with the railroad. But I can promise that whatever happens, I'll face it with you. As your husband, if you'll have me." She should say no. Should insist on waiting until the crisis passed. Until they could do this properly with family and celebration and all the trappings she'd once dreamed of. But those dreams belonged to a different woman. The Philadelphia girl who'd expected ease and elegance. The woman Evelyn had become wanted something else entirely. "Yes," she said simply, "tomorrow." His arms came around her, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or practiced. It was fierce and desperate and honest, a claiming and a promise all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not running. For staying. For being exactly who you are." The next morning, they rode into Copper Ridge with an armed escort. The town had a circuit preacher who happened to be in residence, and he agreed to perform the ceremony in the small church with minimal notice. Evelyn wore her best dress, the one she'd planned to save for some special occasion. Dawson wore clean clothes and looked uncomfortable but determined. Colt, Jake, Pete, Tom, and Will served as witnesses, standing in the empty church with rifles propped against the pews. The ceremony was brief, the words simple. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Colt joked that the railroad probably would if they were here, which broke some of the tension. Then the preacher was saying, "I now pronounce you man and wife." And Dawson was kissing her again, gentler this time, but no less meaningful. They were married. In the middle of a war, with danger closing in on all sides, they had bound themselves together. As they left the church, Evelyn saw a familiar figure across the street, Judge Bramwell Crane, watching from the courthouse steps. Their eyes met. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement or perhaps approval. Then he turned and disappeared inside. "You all right?" Dawson asked, seeing her expression. "Yes. Just saying goodbye to the past." She took his arm. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." They gathered with the other ranchers that afternoon. 8 families had come, representing the last holdouts against the railroad's expansion. They shared stories of harassment and threats, documented losses and damages. The pattern was clear. The railroad was using identical tactics against all of them. One rancher, a woman named Sarah Dutch, whose husband had died the previous year, was particularly outspoken. "They burned my hay stores last week. Winter's coming, and without hay my cattle will starve. They're trying to force me out before the first snow." "Same thing with water for us," another man said. "They've been damming the creek upstream, choking off our supply." Evelyn took notes, documenting everything. This was the evidence they needed, not just one ranch's troubles, but a coordinated campaign of intimidation. "We need to take this to the newspapers," she said when everyone had spoken. "Not just the local paper, they're probably bought and paid for by the railroad, but newspapers in Denver and San Francisco, places where investors read the news and care about their money's reputation." "That takes time," Sarah Dutch pointed out. "Time we might not have." "Then we buy time." Dawson stood. "We stop reacting and start acting. They hit one of us, we all respond. They threaten one ranch, we all defend it. We make it too expensive and too public for them to continue." "You're talking about organizing," another rancher said slowly. "Creating an alliance." "I'm talking about survival. Together we're stronger than any of us alone." The discussion went long into the afternoon. By the end they had a plan, rough and risky, but a plan nonetheless. They would document everything, send evidence to newspapers and politicians. They would defend each other's properties, and they would refuse to be intimidated or bought off. As the meeting broke up, Sarah Dutch approached Evelyn. "I heard you testified against the railroad in court, helped Hale keep his land." "I told the truth about a forged document. Still took courage. Most folks are too scared to stand up to them." Sarah studied her. "You're new to ranch life, aren't you?" "Very new. But you're fighting anyway." "It's my home now, worth fighting for." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Evelyn had seen all day. "You'll do. Welcome to the war, Mrs. Hale." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, husband and wife now, bound together in marriage and in battle. The watchers were on the ridges as always, tracking their return. "They know we went to that meeting," Colt observed. "Know we're organizing." "Good," Dawson said grimly. "Let them wonder what we're planning." That night, as Evelyn and Dawson lay in bed, truly together for the first time, the narrow bed in her old room abandoned for the larger one he'd always used, she listened to his breathing slow into sleep and thought about how much her life had changed. She'd come west expecting a gentleman. She'd found a rugged cowboy instead. And somehow, impossibly, that cowboy had become her husband, her partner, her home. Whatever tomorrow brought, violence or victory, suffering or survival, they would face it together. The ranch was quiet under the stars, but in the darkness, enemies gathered, and the war that had been simmering was about to explode into open conflict that would test every ounce of courage and commitment they possessed. The attack came 3 nights later, swift and brutal in its execution. Evelyn woke to the crash of breaking glass and men shouting. She bolted upright, heart racing, as Dawson threw off the covers and grabbed his rifle from beside the bed. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the door. "Like hell I will." Evelyn snatched the pistol from the bedside table and followed him, still in her nightgown but past caring about propriety. Downstairs, the main room was chaos. Someone had thrown rocks through the windows, and now torches arced through the broken glass, trailing fire as they landed on the wooden floor. Colt and Jake were already stamping out flames while Pete fired through a window at shapes moving in the darkness outside. "How many?" Dawson shouted over the noise. "At least 6, maybe more." Pete ducked as a bullet splintered the window frame above his head. "They're all around us." Evelyn ran to the kitchen, grabbed the water bucket, and threw it on the nearest fire. The flames hissed and died. She refilled the bucket from the pump, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. More gunfire erupted from outside. Tom and Will were in the bunkhouse, returning fire. The sound was deafening, punctuated by the crash of more breaking glass and the whoosh of more torches landing. "They're trying to burn us out," Colt yelled. "We can't fight fires and men at the same time." Dawson made a split-second decision. "Jake, Tom, Will, keep them pinned down. Everyone else fight the fires. If this house goes up, we've got nothing." Evelyn worked alongside Colt and Pete, throwing water on flames that seemed to spring up faster than they could extinguish them. Smoke filled the room, stinging her eyes and choking her lungs. Through the broken windows, she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness as the attackers kept up steady fire. A bullet whined past her head, so close she felt the air move. She dropped instinctively, water sloshing from the bucket. "Evelyn!" Dawson's voice carried over the chaos. "Get to the cellar! I'm helping! You're getting killed! Move!" But even as he shouted, she saw flames licking up the curtains near where he stood. Without thinking, she ran toward him, threw her water on the fire, and found herself face to face with her husband in the smoke-filled room. His expression was equal parts fury and fear. "When I tell you to—" The front door exploded inward. 3 men rushed through, guns blazing. Dawson spun and fired, dropping the first one. Jake got the second. But the third made it inside, a massive brute of a man who backhanded Jake across the face and turned his gun toward Colt. Evelyn didn't think. She raised her pistol and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her over. The shot went wide, missing the intruder but making him turn toward her. His eyes widened. Apparently he hadn't expected a woman in a nightgown to be armed. That moment of hesitation cost him. Dawson's rifle cracked, and the man went down. "Out the back!" Dawson was grabbing her arm, pulling her toward the kitchen. "They're trying to trap us inside. We need to get to the barn. Make a stand there." They ran through the smoke and chaos, Pete and Colt right behind them. Jake had blood streaming from his nose, but he kept moving. Outside, Tom and Will provided covering fire from the bunkhouse as they sprinted across the open yard. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet. Someone screamed. Evelyn couldn't tell if it was one of their men or the attackers. The barn loomed ahead, dark and solid. They crashed through the door and Dawson immediately started barricading it with whatever he could find: barrels, tack boxes, anything heavy. "How many down?" he demanded. 3 of theirs inside the house, Colt panted. "Don't know about outside." "Tom took a bullet in the leg," Will called from the window. "He's still shooting, but he's hurt bad." Dawson cursed. "Can we get to him?" "Not without crossing the open yard. They've got it covered from 3 sides." Evelyn moved to a window, peering out at the ranch. The house was burning now, flames visible through multiple windows. All that work, all those memories, going up in smoke. Her throat tightened with rage and grief. "We need to end this," she said, "before they burn everything." "I'm open to suggestions." Dawson was reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "We're pinned down, outnumbered, and our house is on fire." "Think," Evelyn told herself. "Think like you did in Philadelphia, when creditors came calling and you had to find solutions with no resources. The attackers had numbers and surprise. But what did the defenders have?" "They don't know how many of us there are," she said slowly. "It's dark, confusing. What if we made them think reinforcements arrived? We don't have reinforcements. But they don't know that." An idea was forming. "The church bell in Copper Ridge. When there's trouble, people ring it to call for help. What if they think someone rang it, that townspeople are coming?" Colt caught on immediately. "We make noise from different positions, fire from angles that suggest more shooters. Create confusion." "It's desperate," Jake said. "We're desperate." Dawson looked at Evelyn with something like admiration. "All right, here's what we do." They split up, positioning themselves at different windows and in the hayloft. Dawson had them call out to each other using different names, shouting orders to fictional reinforcements, creating the illusion of a larger force. "Miller, take the left flank. Johnson, cover the rear. Where's the sheriff? Someone said he was coming." The firing pattern changed too. Instead of steady return fire from fixed positions, they shot from multiple angles in quick succession, then moved to new positions before shooting again. Evelyn found herself in the hayloft with a rifle she barely knew how to use properly, firing at shadows and hoping she looked like she knew what she was doing. Below, Dawson and Colt kept up a steady stream of fake communications. "Riders coming from the east. Hold your fire! They're ours!" It was all bluff and misdirection, but in the darkness and confusion, it seemed to work. The attackers' fire became less concentrated, more scattered. They were trying to track threats from multiple directions. Then, incredibly, real riders did appear. Not from town, but from the neighboring ranch. Sarah Dutch and 4 of her hands came thundering into the yard, guns blazing. The rancher alliance they'd formed was actually working. "About time you showed up," Dawson shouted, genuine relief in his voice. "Saw the fires from my land." Sarah's voice carried across the yard. "Figured you might need a hand." The attackers broke. Whether it was the arrival of actual reinforcements or simply the realization that this raid was costing more than expected, they scattered into the darkness. Within minutes, the shooting stopped. Cautiously, the defenders emerged from cover. The house was still burning, flames now consuming the roof. But they were alive. They'd survived. Tom was carried into the barn, his leg wrapped in makeshift bandages. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone, painful and debilitating, but not fatal if they could keep infection out. "You're a lucky son of a bitch," Will told his brother. "Don't feel lucky," Tom groaned. They counted the cost as dawn broke over the ranch. The house was a total loss. Nothing left but charred timbers and ash. 2 of the attackers lay dead in the yard, 3 more inside the ruins. One of Sarah's men had taken a bullet in the shoulder but would recover, and Evelyn stood watching her home burn, Dawson's arm around her shoulders, too exhausted to cry. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I brought you here, promised you a home, and now, don't." She turned to face him. "Don't apologize for fighting for what's yours. What's ours? There's nothing left. The barn's standing, the bunkhouse too. The land is still here." She managed a tired smile. "Besides, I never liked those curtains anyway." He laughed, a short surprise sound, and pulled her close. "How are you not falling apart right now?" "I fell apart once before, when I lost everything in Philadelphia. It nearly destroyed me." She looked up at him. "But I learned something from that. You can lose houses and possessions and even people you love. What matters is what you do after, how you rebuild." Sarah Dutch approached, her weathered face grim but satisfied. "Got 2 of them alive. They're talking. Seems Silas Rourke hired them out of some saloon in Denver, promised good money to drive you off the land, said to do whatever it took." "Will they testify to that?" "One of them will, if it means avoiding a noose. The other's too scared to talk." Sarah glanced at the smoking ruins. "This changes things. Direct assault, hired killers, that's different from harassment. That's attempted murder." "We need to get this to the authorities," Evelyn said. "Real authorities, not just the local sheriff who's probably in Rourke's pocket." "There's a federal marshal in Denver," Colt offered. "Friend of mine from the war. Honest man, can't be bought." Dawson nodded slowly. "Then someone needs to ride to Denver. Bring him back with evidence and witnesses." "I'll go," Jake volunteered, despite the swelling on his face from being backhanded. "Take Pete with you. Ride fast and don't stop for anything." Dawson's jaw was set. "And be careful. Rourke's going to realize his raid failed. He might try to stop word from getting out." As Jake and Pete prepared to leave, Evelyn helped tend to Tom's wound and the other injuries. Her hands were steady as she cleaned and bandaged, though inside she was still shaking from the night's violence. "You did good, ma'am," Tom said as she worked. "Kept your head when most would have panicked." "I was terrified." "Couldn't tell. You just kept fighting those fires like it was washing dishes." It wasn't heroism, Evelyn knew. It was simply refusal to give up. The same stubbornness that had kept her going after her parents died, that had brought her west to start over. She didn't know how to quit. By midday, Jake and Pete were on the road to Denver. Sarah and her men prepared to return to their own ranch, but she pulled Dawson aside before leaving. "You stirred up a hornet's nest with that rancher's alliance," she said bluntly. "Rourke will come after all of us now, not just you." "I know, I'm sorry." "Don't be. We needed stirring up. Been too comfortable letting them pick us off one by one." She glanced at the burned house. "But you can't stay here like this. No shelter, no defenses. Come to my place until you rebuild." "Can't abandon the land. Stubborn fool." But there was respect in her voice. "At least let us help you put up a temporary structure, something to sleep in that's not the barn." Dawson agreed, and over the next 3 days, a remarkable thing happened. Ranchers from across the valley came to help. They brought lumber and nails, canvas and rope. They worked together to erect a simple structure. Not a house, really, more of a large tent with wooden framing. But it had a roof that didn't leak and walls that blocked the wind. Evelyn found herself cooking for a small army of workers, using improvised cook fires and borrowed pots. The women who came with their husbands helped, sharing recipes and stories, and treating her like she'd lived there for years instead of weeks. "You're one of us now," Sarah said, kneading bread dough beside Evelyn. "Stood your ground when most would have run. That means something out here." "I didn't do it alone." "No, but you did it." Sarah glanced toward where Dawson was helping raise support beams. "Your man's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him." "Lucky to have each other, seems like." Sarah shaped the dough into loaves. "My Henry, God rest him, used to say that frontier marriages were stronger than city ones because they had to be. Out here, your partner isn't just someone you love. They're someone you survive with." Evelyn thought about that as she worked. Her engagement back in Philadelphia had been about social position and family connections. This marriage, forged in crisis and sealed with violence, was about something deeper: partnership, trust, survival. That night, lying with Dawson in their makeshift shelter, she asked him something that had been on her mind. "Do you ever regret it? Advertising for a mail-order bride instead of courting someone local?" "Every day." At her sharp intake of breath, he continued, "I regret putting you in danger, bringing you into this mess, but I don't regret you. Even though I can't bake decent bread and I'm terrible with cattle and I nearly shot my own foot off the first time you tried to teach me to use a rifle." Especially because of all that, his arm tightened around her. "You came here expecting a gentleman and got a rough cowboy instead. But you stayed anyway. You fought beside me. You're stronger than any woman I've ever met, and I'm grateful every damn day that you answered that advertisement." Evelyn nestled closer. "I expected peace and found war, but I also found something worth fighting for." They were still lying there, finally allowing themselves to rest, when Colt's voice cut through the darkness. "Boss! Riders coming!" They were on their feet instantly, grabbing weapons. But these weren't attackers. It was Jake and Pete, returned from Denver, and they weren't alone. A tall man with a marshal's badge dismounted, looking around at the burned house and temporary structures with sharp, assessing eyes. "Mr. Hale? I'm Marshal Kane. Your men told me quite a story." Over the next hour, they showed the marshal everything: the bodies of the attackers who'd been buried in a hasty grave, the prisoner who Sarah's men had been guarding, the evidence of burned buildings and damaged property. The prisoner, faced with a federal marshal instead of local law, broke completely and confirmed that Silas Rourke had hired them. "This is bigger than one ranch," Marshal Kane said when he'd heard everything. "Your men tell me there's a pattern of harassment across multiple properties." 8 ranches that we know of, Evelyn provided the notes she'd been keeping, all in the path of the proposed railroad route, all experiencing similar tactics. The marshal read through her documentation, his expression growing darker. "This is systematic intimidation, possibly conspiracy to commit fraud. The railroads claiming eminent domain on land they don't legally own, then using violence to force sales." He looked up. "I'll need to speak with the other ranchers, gather sworn statements, build a case that will hold up in federal court." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, maybe months. These things don't move fast." He saw their expressions. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but if we do this right, we can shut down the whole operation, not just here, but everywhere the railroad's using these tactics." "And in the meantime?" Dawson's voice was hard. "Rourke's still out there, still hiring guns. In the meantime, you defend yourselves, but now you're doing it with federal backing. Anyone attacks you, they're attacking witnesses in a federal investigation." Marshal Kane's smile was cold. "That tends to make people think twice." It wasn't perfect protection, but it was something. The marshal rode out the next morning to interview other ranchers, taking the prisoner with him and leaving Jake and Pete to coordinate between the scattered properties. For a few days, things were almost peaceful. The watchers on the ridges disappeared. No shots rang out. The ranch settled into a routine of rebuilding and recovery. Evelyn should have known it wouldn't last. She was working in the temporary kitchen area trying to make something edible from their limited supplies when Colt came running. Riders, a lot of them, coming fast from the east. Everyone grabbed weapons and took defensive positions. But as the riders came into view, Evelyn saw something that made her heart leap. Sarah Dutch in the lead, and behind her at least 20 armed men and women, all of them ranchers from the Alliance. They thundered into the yard and dismounted, faces grim. "Rourke's made his move," Sarah said without preamble. "He's got maybe 30 hired guns gathering in Copper Ridge. Word is they're planning to hit all our ranches at once, burn us all out in one night." "When?" Dawson demanded. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after. Our man in town couldn't get exact details, but it's happening soon." The assembled ranchers looked at each other. They'd come together to defend themselves, but none of them had expected open war on this scale. "We can't defend 8 scattered ranches against 30 guns," one of the older ranchers said. "Not simultaneously. So we don't defend 8 ranches." Evelyn surprised herself by speaking. "We defend 1. We bring everyone here, make a stand together, force them to come to us instead of spreading out. Turn the Double H into a fortress," Colt said slowly. "Consolidate our forces." "It's Hale's land they want most," Sarah pointed out. "Railroad's already got the routes surveyed through this valley. Take them out, the rest of us fold easier. So yeah, they'll come here. Question is whether we're ready for them." Dawson looked around at the temporary structures, the damaged barn, the open ground that offered little cover. "We've got 2 days to fortify this place. That's not much time." "Then we'd better get started." Sarah turned to her fellow ranchers. "Anyone not willing to fight, leave now. This is going to be bloody, but those of us who stay, we make them regret ever hearing the name Copper Ridge." No one left. They worked through the day and into the night, transforming the ranch into a defensive position. Trenches were dug, barricades erected, ammunition distributed. The women and children were sent to the most protected area, the root cellar beneath where the house had stood, with instructions to stay there no matter what they heard above. Evelyn refused to hide. "I can shoot well enough now. I'm fighting." Dawson didn't argue. He'd learned by now that arguing with her was pointless. Instead, he positioned her in the hayloft of the barn with extra ammunition and clear sight lines. "Don't be a hero," he said as he helped her climb up. "Just cover your sector. If things get bad, you run. Understand? Only if you promise the same." "Evelyn, promise me, Dawson. Don't you dare die being heroic. I didn't survive this long just to lose you now." He pulled her close, kissed her hard. "I promise. We both survived this. Together." As night fell on the second day, they were as ready as they could be. 23 defenders spread across the ranch property, each with clear positions and fields of fire. Trenches and barricades provided cover. Extra weapons were cached in multiple locations. Marshal Kane had returned earlier that day with news that he'd gotten statements from 6 other ranchers. The federal case was building, but he'd also confirmed that Rourke had indeed hired a small army. "They're professionals," the marshal warned, "not drunk ranch hands or desperate drifters. Rourke's paying top dollar for experienced gunmen." "Then it's war," Dawson said simply. The marshal looked around at the preparations. "I'm staying. Federal officer witnessing this attack adds weight to the case. You'll probably get killed." "Probably. But that's the job." They waited through the night, tension mounting as the hours passed. False alarms had everyone jumping at shadows. The moon rose full and bright, eliminating any advantage of darkness. Then, as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, they came. Evelyn saw them from her position in the hayloft. A line of riders emerging from the pre-dawn gloom spread out in a skirmish line that suggested military training. They came neither slowly nor quickly, advancing with the confidence of superior numbers. "Here they come!" she called down. All across the ranch, defenders readied themselves. Hammers clicked as rifles were cocked. Breath was held. Prayers were whispered. The riders kept coming. Dawson stood in the center of the yard, visible and defiant. When the riders were within shouting distance, he called out, "That's far enough. You're trespassing on private property." A man rode forward from the line. Not Rourke, but someone equally dangerous-looking, scarred and cold-eyed. "We've got no quarrel with anyone but Hale. The rest of you clear out, you live." "Everyone here is standing with Hale," Sarah Dutch's voice rang out. "You want his land, you go through all of us." The scarred man shrugged. "Your funeral." He raised his hand and hell came to the Double H ranch. The attackers charged, guns blazing. Defenders returned fire from covered positions. The The quiet dawn exploded into chaos of smoke and thunder and screaming horses. From her elevated position, Evelyn had a clear view of the battle unfolding below. She forced herself to breathe steadily, to aim carefully like Dawson had taught her, to squeeze the trigger rather than jerk it. Her first shot missed. The second hit a rider's horse, dropping it and throwing the man. Her third caught an attacker in the shoulder as he tried to flank the barn. Below, Dawson fought like a demon, his rifle cracking with mechanical precision. Beside him, Colt and the Garrett brothers held the center line. Sarah Dutch and her people defended the left flank, while other ranchers held the right. But the attackers kept coming, wave after wave. They'd brought more men than anyone expected, not 30, but 40, maybe more. Professional gunmen who knew their business and executed it with brutal efficiency. A group of them made it to the barn. Evelyn heard them below trying to break through the barricaded door. She aimed down through gaps in the floor and fired, not knowing if she hit anyone but driving them back. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Smoke from gunfire drifted across the yard, obscuring vision. Men fell on both sides, attackers and defenders alike. The noise was deafening, overwhelming. Then Evelyn saw him, Silas Rourke himself, riding into the fray on a magnificent black horse, directing his men like a general. He'd come to witness his victory personally. She tried to line up a shot, but the angle was wrong. He was too far, too protected by his own men. Below, she heard Dawson shout something. Then he was running, actually running toward Rourke's position. Colt and Will tried to cover him, but it was suicide to leave the barricades. "No!" Evelyn screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. She watched in horror as Dawson charged through gunfire, somehow untouched, reaching Rourke's horse and dragging the man from the saddle. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, Rourke's guards unable to shoot without hitting their own boss. The fight became personal then. Hand to hand, Dawson and Rourke struggled in the dirt while battle raged around them. Rourke was bigger, but Dawson fought with the fury of a man protecting everything he loved. Evelyn abandoned her position and ran down from the hayloft, her only thought to help her husband. She burst out of the barn into the smoke and chaos, pistol in hand, and ran straight into one of the attackers. He was huge, with dead eyes and a gun pointed straight at her chest. Time seemed to slow. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel of his gun, impossibly large. Then Marshal Kane appeared from nowhere and tackled the man sideways. They both went down, the gun firing into the air. Evelyn didn't wait to see more. She ran toward where Dawson and Rourke still fought, now joined by others as the battle collapsed into desperate close-quarters combat. A bullet grazed her arm. Hot pain, but not debilitating. She kept running. Someone tried to grab her, but she twisted away and kept moving. Finally, she reached them. Dawson had Rourke pinned, his hands around the man's throat. But one of Rourke's guards was behind him, raising a rifle to shoot Dawson in the back. Evelyn raised her pistol and fired. The guard dropped. Dawson looked up, saw her, and his expression went from fury to terror. "Get back to cover!" "Not without you!" Before he could respond, the tide of battle shifted. Maybe it was seeing their boss losing his fight. Maybe it was casualties mounting higher than they'd expected. But suddenly the attackers were pulling back, retreating toward their horses. Rourke, pinned and beaten, screamed for them to stand and fight. But they were done. They'd come for easy money, not a sustained war. Within minutes, the shooting stopped. The surviving attackers fled, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Dawson released Rourke but didn't let him up. "Marshal, I've got one for you." But Marshal Kane limped over. He'd taken a bullet in the leg but was still standing. "Silas Rourke, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and about a dozen other charges I'll think of while we ride to Denver." Rourke's face was purple with rage and humiliation. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, lawyers." "You have a cell waiting in federal prison," Kane interrupted, "and testimony from every survivor of this attack. You're done." As the marshal secured Rourke, Evelyn and Dawson found each other in the smoking ruins of the battlefield. His face was bloodied, her arm bleeding. Both were filthy and exhausted and alive. "You promised not to be a hero," she said, her voice shaking. "So did you." He pulled her close, heedless of wounds and watching eyes. "God, Evelyn, when I saw you run out into that—" "I know. I saw you charge Rourke and We're idiots. Complete idiots. She was laughing and crying at the same time. We could have died, but we didn't. He held her tighter. We're alive, together. Around them, the survivors were emerging from cover, checking the wounded, counting the cost. 3 defenders dead, including one of Sarah's best men. 8 wounded seriously enough to need doctoring. The barn had taken heavy damage. More fences destroyed. Cattle scattered again. But they'd won. The railroad's private army was broken. Rourke was in custody, and every rancher who'd stood together now knew they could defend their land if they stood united. As dawn fully broke over the valley, Evelyn stood with Dawson's arm around her, surveying the damage and thinking about what came next. Rebuilding again. Healing again. Starting over again. But this time they wouldn't do it alone. Sarah approached with news that the other ranchers were already planning to help rebuild, just as they'd helped after the house burned. We're a community now, she said simply. What hurts one of us hurts all of us. Marshal Kane rode out later that day with Rourke and 2 other prisoners in custody. He promised to send word when the trial date was set. They'd all need to testify. That night, as Evelyn tended to Dawson's injuries in their temporary shelter, she thought about how far they'd come. From strangers exchanging letters to partners in war, from a tentative arrangement to a marriage forged in fire and blood. I never asked, Dawson said quietly as she bandaged his ribs. What made you answer my advertisement? Out of all the options you must have had, why a rough rancher in the middle of nowhere? Evelyn considered the question. Because your letter was honest. You didn't promise ease or comfort. You said you needed someone strong, someone who wouldn't run. And I'd spent so long being weak, letting circumstances break me. I wanted to be the person you described, even if I wasn't sure I could be. And are you? That person? She thought about everything she'd done since arriving, standing up in court, fighting fires, shooting at attackers, refusing to hide when violence came. None of it had come naturally. All of it had terrified her. But she'd done it anyway. I'm becoming her, she said finally. Every day. A little more. Good. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. Because I need her. Need you. Today proved that. We need each other, Evelyn corrected. That's what partners do. That's what this is. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, too tired for anything but presence and proximity. Outside, guards kept watch, and the valley slowly settled into a peace that might actually last this time. The war wasn't completely over. Trials would come. The railroad would fight back through legal channels, and rebuilding would be hard work. But the worst was behind them. They'd survived. Together. And that, Evelyn thought as sleep finally claimed her, was worth every moment of terror and struggle. She'd come west looking for a new life. She'd found a home worth defending, a man worth fighting beside, and a strength she never knew she possessed. She'd expected a gentleman and found a rugged cowboy instead. And somehow, impossibly, that was exactly what she'd needed all along. The morning after the battle dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that made the mountains stand out sharp against the sky. Evelyn woke to find Dawson already up, standing in the doorway of their makeshift shelter and looking out over the ranch. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him, slipping her hand into his. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Kept thinking about all the work ahead, the rebuilding, making sure this peace actually holds. He squeezed her hand, and thinking about how lucky I am that you're still here. Where else would I be? Philadelphia, Denver, anywhere safer and more civilized than this. He gestured at the damaged buildings, the churned-up yard still bearing evidence of yesterday's violence. I brought you into a war zone. No, you brought me to a home worth defending. There's a difference. Evelyn leaned against him. Besides, I think we're past the worst now. Rourke's in custody. His hired guns are scattered. The other ranchers proved they'll stand together. Maybe, but the railroad itself is still out there. They've got lawyers and money and influence. And we've got the truth. Federal marshals. Evidence of their crimes. She turned to face him. They can't intimidate us anymore, Dawson. That power's broken. He wanted to believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But he'd been fighting this battle too long to accept victory easily. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Both tensed reflexively, hands moving toward weapons. But these were friends, Sarah Dutch and half a dozen other ranchers from the Alliance, their wagons loaded with lumber and supplies. "Figured you could use some help," Sarah called out as she dismounted. "We're not leaving until you've got a proper house again." Over the next weeks, the valley transformed. The ranchers who'd fought together now built together. Men who'd barely known each other's names before the crisis became friends, working side by side to raise walls and lay floors. Women gathered to cook communal meals and share the work of feeding so many helpers. Evelyn found herself at the center of it all, coordinating supplies and schedules, settling disputes, and solving problems. She'd never imagined herself in such a role, but apparently surviving a siege gave you a certain authority. "You're a natural leader," Sarah observed one afternoon as they worked together making curtains for the new house's windows. "Didn't expect that from a city girl." "I didn't expect it either." Evelyn measured fabric carefully. "Back east, I was nobody special, just another young woman in a world that didn't have much use for me." "That world was foolish then. Out here, you're exactly what's needed." Sarah pinned fabric in place. "Speaking of which, some of the other women were talking. We're thinking about making this Ranchers Alliance permanent, not just for defense, but for everything. Shared supplies, coordinated cattle drives, mutual support." "That's a good idea." "We were hoping you'd help organize it. You've got a head for details and people listen to you." Evelyn looked up from her work, surprised. "I've only been here a few months. Surely someone more established." Someone more established didn't stand in a hayloft shooting at professional gunmen while the rest of us huddled behind barricades. Sarah's expression was serious. "You've earned your place here, Evelyn. Stop questioning whether you belong." The word settled into Evelyn's chest, warm and solid. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt truly rooted. This was her community now. These people were her family. The new house rose steadily, larger than the old one and built with defense in mind. Dawson insisted on stone for the lower walls, harder to burn. The windows were positioned to provide clear sightlines. A reinforced cellar was dug deep enough to serve as shelter if needed. "You're building a fortress," Evelyn observed as walls went up. "I'm building a home that can withstand trouble." Dawson hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "I won't lose another house to railroad thugs." "The railroad's finished here. You know that." "I know Rourke's in jail awaiting trial. I know his hired guns scattered, but the railroad company itself?" He shook his head. "They've got too much invested to just walk away. They'll try something else." He was right to be cautious. Evelyn knew that. But she also saw how the constant vigilance was wearing on him. He barely slept. He checked every horizon compulsively. He kept weapons within reach at all times. That evening, as they lay in their temporary shelter, listening to coyotes howl in the distance, she broached the subject carefully. "You're going to exhaust yourself if you don't relax eventually." "Can't relax, not until I know for certain we're safe." "We're as safe as we're ever going to be. There are no guarantees in life, Dawson." She rolled over to face him in the darkness. "At some point, you have to choose to live instead of just survive." "I am living." "Are you? Or are you just waiting for the next attack?" He was silent for a long moment. "I don't know how to stop waiting. Don't know how to trust that it's really over." "Then we learn together." She found his hand, laced her fingers through his. "One day at a time, one moment at a time. We choose to believe in peace until something proves otherwise. And if something does, then we'll deal with it, together, like we've dealt with everything else." 2 weeks later, a telegram arrived from Marshal Kane. The trial date was set, 3 months away in Denver. All witnesses would be needed. The marshal had built a case that implicated not just Rourke, but several railroad executives in a pattern of illegal land acquisition across 3 territories. "This is bigger than we thought," Dawson said, reading the telegram. "He's going after the whole operation." "Good. Make an example of them. Show other companies they can't terrorize people off their land." It also means 3 months of uncertainty. 3 months where the railroad knows we're going to testify against them. Evelyn understood his concern. A cornered animal was dangerous. A corporation facing federal prosecution was potentially deadly, but the weeks passed without incident. The new house was completed, solid and sturdy and beautiful in its practical way. They moved in with a celebration that drew every rancher in the valley. There was music and dancing and more food than Evelyn had seen in one place since leaving Philadelphia. As the sun set on their first night in the new house, Dawson pulled her aside from the celebration. "Come with me. Want to show you something." He led her up the stairs to the second floor, past the bedrooms to a small door at the end of the hall. Behind it, narrow steps climbed to the roof. They emerged onto a flat section of roof that Dawson had insisted on including in the design. From here, they could see the entire valley spread out below, their land, their cattle, the mountains beyond, and scattered lights from neighboring ranches. "This is why," Dawson said quietly. "This is what I fought for. What we fought for." Evelyn turned slowly, taking in the view. In the fading light, the valley was breathtaking. But more than that, it was theirs. Every acre had been defended and earned. Every fence line represented a choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's home." He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I used to come up on the old house roof sometimes, before you arrived. Stand there and wonder if I was crazy for fighting so hard for a piece of land. If maybe I should just take the money and start somewhere else. What changed? You did. The moment you stepped off that stage, I knew I was fighting for more than land. I was fighting for a future, for partnership, for—" He paused, then continued quietly, "for love." Evelyn's breath caught. They'd married quickly, out of necessity and convenience. They'd fought together, built together, survived together. But neither had spoken of love. It had seemed too fragile a word for what they were creating. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easier than expected. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe gradually, maybe all at once. But looking at this valley, standing in our house, being part of this community, I can't imagine being anywhere else, with anyone else." He turned her around to face him. In the twilight, his features were soft, the hard edges worn away by emotion. "I know I'm not the gentleman you probably dreamed of marrying, not refined or educated or—" "Stop." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "You're exactly who I need. You're honest and strong and loyal. You fight for what matters. You treat me like an equal partner instead of a decoration or a burden. That's worth more than all the refinement in the world. Still, you gave up a lot to come here. Comfort, safety, society. I gave up nothing I valued and gained everything that matters." She pulled his face down to hers. "Don't you understand yet? This rough cowboy life, this dangerous valley, this hard existence, it's exactly what I needed. It made me strong, made me real, made me myself." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "We should get back to the party," he said, though he made no move to leave. "They won't miss us for a few more minutes." They stood on their rooftop as the stars emerged, holding each other and watching their land settle into night. Below, the celebration continued, laughter and music drifting up on the evening air. It was a sound of community, of peace, of life continuing despite all efforts to destroy it. The next morning brought another telegram, this one from Bramwell Crane. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment before opening it, unsure what to expect from the judge who'd destroyed her past. The message was brief. "Confession sent to Philadelphia authorities as promised. Your father's name cleared. All blame officially placed on me. I resign my position effective immediately. May you find the peace I cannot. BC." Evelyn read it twice, then handed it to Dawson without speaking. She felt oddly empty, no triumph, no satisfaction, just a sense of something long carried finally being set down. "He kept his word," Dawson observed. "Yes, doesn't change what he did, but—" Evelyn shrugged. "At least my father's reputation is restored. That's something." "Is it enough?" "It has to be. Justice isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it's just done." She folded the telegram carefully. "My parents are gone. No amount of revenge or restitution brings them back. But knowing the truth is finally official, that matters." Dawson pulled her close. "You're a better person than most, Evelyn Hale. I'm just tired of carrying hate. There's too much else worth focusing on." The weeks leading up to the trial were busy with ranch work and preparation. Cattle needed to be rounded up and counted. Fences needed constant mending. The garden Evelyn had planted was producing more vegetables than they could eat, so she organized preserving efforts with the other ranch women. Life was settling into patterns that felt sustainable, even comfortable. The constant fear that had marked their first months together gradually faded into simple caution. They still kept weapons handy and maintained watches, but it no longer felt like living under siege. Pete returned from a trip to Copper Ridge with news that several railroad executives had been arrested based on Marshal Kane's investigation. The company was in turmoil, facing federal prosecution and investor revolt. The proposed route through the valley had been suspended indefinitely. "They're finished here," Pete reported. "Town's buzzing with it. Railroads pulling out completely, focusing on defending themselves in court." "It's really over then," Evelyn said quietly. "Looks like it." Pete grinned. "We won, boss. Actually won." That night, Dawson finally allowed himself to believe it. Evelyn woke to find him sitting on the edge of their bed, shoulders shaking. For a moment she thought he was crying, but then she realized he was laughing, great gasping laughs of relief and disbelief. "We won," he kept saying. "We actually won." She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his back. "Yes, we did. Together." The trial in Denver came and went. Evelyn and Dawson testified, along with a dozen other ranchers and Marshal Kane himself. The evidence was overwhelming. Silas Rourke was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. 3 railroad executives received shorter sentences and hefty fines. The company was placed under federal oversight and ordered to pay restitution to every rancher they'd harmed. Walking out of the courthouse, Evelyn felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. It was truly finished. The threat was gone. The battle was over. "What do we do now?" she asked Dawson as they prepared to ride back to the valley. "We live. Just live. Build our ranch, raise cattle, maybe—" He glanced at her sideways. "Maybe start a family." Evelyn's heart skipped. They'd been so focused on survival that she hadn't let herself think about children. But now, with peace finally real and lasting, the possibility opened up like a flower. "I'd like that," she said softly. "A family, children who'll grow up knowing this land like you do, who'll understand what it cost to keep it. They'll know their mother was the bravest woman in the territory, that she stood against hired guns and corrupt judges and a whole damn railroad company. And they'll know their father was a man worth fighting beside, worth building a life with." She took his hand. "Come on, let's go home." The ride back to Copper Ridge took 2 days. They could have pushed harder, made it in one long day, but they chose to take their time, to enjoy the journey instead of rushing toward the destination. They camped under the stars the first night, lying on their bedrolls and watching constellations wheel overhead. Evelyn had learned their names now. Dawson had taught her during long evenings on their rooftop. The sky here was so much bigger than in Philadelphia, so much more full of light. "What are you thinking?" Dawson asked, catching her smiling at the stars. "That I'm happy. Actually, genuinely happy." She rolled onto her side to look at him. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again after my parents died. Thought maybe happiness was something I'd lost permanently. And now? Now I know that happiness isn't something you have or lose. It's something you build, with hard work and commitment and someone worth building it with." "You're getting philosophical in your old age, Mrs. Hale." "I'm 23. Ancient." He grinned at her outrage. "Practically an old woman." She hit him with her hat, which devolved into wrestling that ended with both of them breathless and laughing and tangled together under the stars. They arrived home the next afternoon to find the ranch running smoothly in their absence. Colt had everything under control, with help from the Garrett brothers and several new hands they'd hired with the restitution money. "Place practically runs itself now," Colt reported, "though it'll be good to have you back. Things are too quiet without you two stirring up trouble." "I think we're done stirring up trouble," Dawson said firmly. "From now on, this is a peaceful ranch." "Boring," Pete commented, but he was smiling. The valley settled into autumn, then winter. Snow came early and heavy, blanketing everything in white. Evelyn had worried about her first mountain winter, but found she loved it. The quiet beauty, the way the land transformed, the excuse to stay inside by the fire. She and Dawson spent long evenings planning for spring, They'd expand the herd, plant more crops, maybe add another room to the house if the family they hoped for materialized. The Ranchers Alliance formalized into an actual organization, with Sarah Dutch as president and Evelyn as secretary. They met monthly to coordinate efforts and support each other. What had begun as desperate defense against a common enemy evolved into genuine community. One evening in late February, as wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, Evelyn realized she hadn't thought about Philadelphia in weeks. The life she'd left behind felt like it belonged to someone else, a different woman in a different world. "Everything all right?" Dawson asked, noticing her faraway expression. "Better than all right. I was just thinking about how much has changed, how much I've changed. For the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better." She moved from her chair to sit beside him on the sofa. "The woman who answered your advertisement was lost and afraid and pretending to be braver than she felt. Now I actually am brave. Not fearless. I don't think I'll ever be fearless. But strong enough to face what comes. Confident enough in myself and in us." "I was lost too," Dawson admitted. "Angry at my brother, bitter about the railroad, holding on to this land out of stubbornness as much as love. You gave me something worth protecting beyond just acreage and cattle. You gave me a reason to build instead of just defend. We saved each other then." "Seems like it." He kissed her forehead. Not a bad outcome for a mail-order bride arrangement. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted into rushing streams, the grass turned green, cattle grew fat on new growth. And one morning in April, Evelyn woke feeling different, a subtle change she couldn't quite name. It took her a week to identify the feeling, then another week to be certain. When she finally told Dawson, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "Careful, you'll hurt the baby." "The baby is fine, tiny, probably the size of a bean right now." But he set her down carefully anyway, his hands gentle on her waist. "We're having a child." "We are." Evelyn couldn't stop smiling. "A son or daughter who'll grow up here, in the valley we fought for, who'll know this land like you do and be strong like we had to be, and who'll never know how close we came to losing it all." Dawson's expression turned serious. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it through. When I think about that first court case, or the night they burned the house, or that final battle, so many times we could have lost everything. But we didn't. We held on." Evelyn placed his hand over her belly, where new life was just beginning. "And now we're building something that will last beyond us. A family, a legacy. Proof that standing your ground matters." Word of the pregnancy spread through the valley. The women descended with advice and baby clothes and stern warnings about taking it easy. The men congratulated Dawson with barely suppressed envy. The Hales were starting the next generation, proof that their community had a future. Sarah Dutch was particularly pleased. "About time this valley had some babies. Been too long since we've heard children laughing around here." As Evelyn's belly grew through the summer, the ranch prospered. The cattle herd expanded. The garden flourished. Dawson and the hands built a nursery in the upstairs room with the best light, painting the walls soft yellow and constructing a cradle from pine. Dawson cut himself. In August, Marshal Kane visited with final news about the railroad case. All sentences had been upheld on appeal. The company had been broken up and sold. Its practices exposed, other railroads were being scrutinized for similar abuses. "Your testimony made the difference," Kane told them. "All of you who stood up and refused to be intimidated. You didn't just save your ranches, you changed how these companies operate across the West." "Good," Evelyn said simply. "No one else should have to fight the way we did." "They won't. Not like that anyway." The marshal prepared to leave. "You built something here, a community that looks after its own. That's rare and valuable. Protect it." "We will," Dawson promised. The baby came in early October, arriving with the first frost. It was a difficult birth. Evelyn labored for nearly 20 hours while Dawson paced outside and the ranch women took turns supporting her. But when she finally heard her daughter's first cry, every moment of pain evaporated. "She's beautiful," the midwife said, placing the tiny bundle in Evelyn's arms. "Strong lungs, too. She'll be a fighter." Dawson was allowed in, finally, looking terrified and awed in equal measure. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at his daughter like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "We made this," he said wonderingly, "this perfect little person." "We did." Evelyn was exhausted but happier than she'd ever been. What should we name her? They'd discussed names for months without deciding. But looking at their daughter now, tiny and fierce and already gripping her father's finger with surprising strength, Evelyn knew exactly what to call her. Grace. Because we were given so much grace, so many second chances. She looked at Dawson. "What do you think?" "Grace Hale." He tested the name. "I like it. Strong name for a strong girl." Grace was duly welcomed into the Valley community with a celebration that drew every rancher for miles. They came bearing gifts, hand-sewn blankets, carved toys, offers of help and support. The child who would grow up on the Double H Ranch was already part of something larger than just her immediate family. As winter approached again, Evelyn found herself on the rooftop one evening while Grace slept below and Dawson checked the barn. She stood looking out over the valley, reflecting on the incredible year behind her. She'd arrived expecting a gentleman and found a rugged cowboy instead. She'd hoped for peace and found war. She'd wanted safety and discovered that real security came not from avoiding danger, but from having the strength to face it. She'd lost a house to fire and rebuilt it stronger. She'd faced down hired guns and corrupt officials. She'd stood her ground when running would have been easier, and through it all, she'd discovered reserves of courage and resilience she never knew she possessed. The door behind her opened and Dawson emerged, carrying their daughter wrapped in blankets. "Thought I'd find you up here." He moved to stand beside her. Grace woke up, figured she should see the view. Evelyn smiled at her husband and daughter, her family, her home, her future. Grace blinked up at the stars with wide, wondering eyes. "This is all yours someday," Dawson told his daughter softly. "Every acre, every building, every fence line. Your mother and I fought for it, bled for it, nearly died for it. So you remember that when you're old enough to understand. Remember what it cost to keep this land free." "And remember that you're loved," Evelyn added, stroking Grace's tiny hand. "More than you'll ever know. That you're part of a community that stands together. That you come from strength and courage on both sides." They stood together as the stars emerged, a family complete. The valley spread out below them, their valley, hard-won and dearly held. In the distance, lights from neighboring ranches twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing another family they'd fought beside. The railroad was gone. Silas Rourke was imprisoned. The threats that had dominated their early months together had been defeated. Peace, real and lasting, had finally arrived. Evelyn thought about the advertisement she'd answered so many months ago, a simple request for a ranch wife. She'd expected a business arrangement. She'd found a partnership that changed everything. "Thank you," she said quietly. Dawson looked at her. "For what?" "For the advertisement. For taking a chance on a city woman with no ranch experience. For seeing strength in me I didn't see in myself." She leaned against him, careful of the baby between them. "For giving me a home worth fighting for. I should be thanking you. For answering. For staying when things got dangerous. For making this place a home instead of just a ranch." He kissed her temple. "I advertised for a wife. I found a partner, a warrior, and the love of my life." Grace made a small sound as if commenting on her parents' conversation. They both laughed. "Come on," Evelyn said. "Let's get her inside before the cold gets too much. Tomorrow's another day of work." "Tomorrow and all the days after, together." "Together," Evelyn agreed. They descended from the rooftop, carrying their daughter into the warm house. Behind them, the valley settled into night, peaceful now, but bearing the marks of the battles fought to keep it that way. Every scar told a story. Every rebuilt fence was a testament to refusal to surrender. As Evelyn tucked Grace into her cradle and climbed into bed beside her husband, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From Philadelphia's drawing rooms to a frontier ranch, from helpless grief to purposeful strength, from expecting a gentleman to finding a rugged cowboy who was so much more than she'd dared to hope for. The wind whistled around the solid stone walls of their house, the house they'd built together after the first one burned. The sound was comforting rather than threatening now. This home would stand. This family would endure. This land would remain theirs. Dawson pulled her close, his breath evening into sleep. Evelyn listened to him breathe and to Grace's tiny sighs from the cradle and to the night sounds of the ranch outside. She listened and smiled and finally, completely, felt at peace. She'd come west hoping for a new beginning. She'd found something far better, a true home, earned through courage and defended with love, a partnership forged in fire and strengthened through every trial, a future stretching ahead, full of promise and possibility. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The mountains stood silent watch over the valley. And on the Double H Ranch, a family slept secure in the knowledge that they'd fought for what mattered and won. The rough cowboy and the city woman who'd become a frontier wife. The rugged rancher and the brave woman who'd found her strength. Partners in every sense of the word, building a life that would echo through generations. Together, they'd faced down corruption and violence. Together, they'd built a community from scattered, frightened individuals. Together, they'd proven that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. And now, together, they would raise their daughter in the valley they'd defended. They would teach her about strength and community and standing your ground. They would pass on the lessons learned through struggle, that home is worth fighting for, that partnership means facing danger together, and that real peace comes not from avoiding conflict, but from having the courage to defend what you love. As dawn approached and the first birds began their morning songs, Evelyn woke briefly. She looked at her sleeping husband, at their daughter peaceful in her cradle, at the solid walls of the home they'd built together. She thought about everything they'd survived and everything still to come, and she smiled, because she'd expected a gentleman and found a rugged cowboy instead, and that cowboy had given her everything she never knew she needed: purpose, partnership, strength, and love. He'd given her a home. Not just a place, but a true home, in every sense of the word. A home worth fighting for. A home worth defending. A home where she belonged completely and without question. The sun rose over the valley, painting the mountains gold and sending light streaming through the windows of the Double H Ranch. It found a family secure in their hard-won peace, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing they would face it together, always together. And that made all the difference.